All right, Jianchen was overjoyed. A grand exalts cultivation method and one that specialized in radiant saint force was basically a temptation he could not resist. Immediately, Jianchen left the hill alone. He condensed a pair of radiant wings and flew towards a region devoid of people. The 8 protectors opened their eyes slightly. They watched Jianchen leave, but they did not stop him. The 8 of them were Donglin Yanshue's retainers. Protecting Donglin Yanshue was their responsibility, so the 8 of them could not leave like Jianchen before they obtained Donglin Yanshue's permission. Jianchen flew through the world within the sacred pavilion quickly. He no longer concealed his strength, erupting with his full speed. He could cross 1,000 kilometers in a single instance, and he soon arrived in an empty region. Along the way, he encountered many radiant god kings. He could detect their position in advance and avoid them easily. He could now sense things within a range of several tens of thousand kilometers, while the radiant god kings were only at the peak of mid-god king at most. Under the influence of the mist, they could only sense several thousand kilometers away. As a result, Jianchen was not detected by anyone along the way. Before long, Jianchen finally arrived in a location that rarely saw any people. It was a barren mountain range. The radiant saint force in the area was thin, so very few people set foot here. Jianchen stopped in a valley within the depths of the mountain range. The mountains around him stood like a basin. Hence, even if there were some disturbances from the opening of the miniature world, he could use his surroundings to cover it slightly. Artifact Spirit, open up the miniature world here, Jianchen secretly called out to the Artifact Spirit. He was no longer able to sense the Artifact Spirit's existence, but since the Artifact Spirit had gained a rudimentary control over the Tower of Radiance, he was equivalent to the world here. It would sense everything that happened within the Tower of Radiance. As expected, the space in the valley began to pulse violently. As if a great, invisible power had suddenly descended, the space there twisted. In that instance, the barren mountain range where Jianchen stood became enveloped by the great power of space. The space there constantly shook as the landscape twisted. It was all reduced to a blur. Jianchen secretly frowned at this sight. He stared at the distorting space that spread over towards him, and with a single movement he appeared 1,000 meters away like he had teleported. However, a huge boulder which stood where he was before became enveloped by the twisted space. It crumbled into pieces silently. Why have you created such a great disturbance? Jianchen's heart sank slightly. The disturbance was just too great. If this continued, radiant god kings would be drawn over before long. Master, the gateway to the miniature world is just too difficult to open. I've only just gained a basic grasp over the Tower of Radiance, so I can only use a tiny portion of its power. I still need some time. At the same time, the strained voice of the Artifact Spirit rang out in Jianchen's head. Clearly, the difficulty of opening the miniature world was far greater than the Artifact Spirit had expected. With his current ability, it was clearly extremely strenuous for him to open up the miniature world. After all, the memories he had inherited were incomplete. They were only a few fragments, so he obviously had no idea how much power he needed to open up this gate. Gradually, the disturbance grew greater and greater. The pulses of energy and power of space spread beyond the range of the mountain uncontrollably. Several tens of thousand kilometers away, there happened to be a few radiant god kings traveling together. They conversed and laughed along the way. At this moment, their faces changed. They suddenly looked in the direction of the mountain range and cried out, "What great powers of space! What's happening there? This energy really is powerful. Let's go and have a look." As a result, these radiant god kings hurried towards the mountains. Strange. Why would space pulse within the Tower of Radiance? It's impossible for any of us to grasp the laws of space. Is the Tower of Radiance undergoing something unrecorded in the books again? Ignore the ancient imprints. The space inside the Tower of Radiance has suddenly become abnormal. Something else is going to happen here again. Let's go and quickly have a look. During the first time, dense radiant saint force and the fragments of the laws of the hallowed suddenly appeared. Now that it's the second time, a great fortuitous encounter must be involved. As time went on, more and more radiant god kings sensed the disturbances from the mountains. Immediately, they all stopped what they were doing and hurried over with lightning speed. The entire valley was filled with distorted space, causing the space there to become extremely chaotic. Jianchen had already left the valley. He stood in an inconspicuous location 10 kilometers away, paying close attention to the disturbances in the valley. He would glance around the surroundings of the valley indifferently from time to time. Radiant god kings arrived in the surroundings of the valley group after group. These people all gathered around the valley, maintaining a certain distance as they stared at the distorted space and discussed. "It's my miscalculation this time. I never thought it would be this difficult to open up the miniature world," Jianchen thought. The gathering of the radiant god kings basically made it impossible for him to receive the Grand Exalt's legacy silently. It looks like a spatial gate is about to open up in the valley. To another side, Donglin Xiaoshui stood on a mountain with over 30 radiant god kings behind her. It is indeed the sign of a spatial gate opening. However, this spatial gate is clearly extremely stable, making it extremely difficult to open. That's why this has happened. There's actually another space hidden within the sacred pavilion. This has never been recorded in the history of our Radiant Saint Hall. A middle-aged man stood with his hands behind his back to another direction. Over 20 radiant god kings stood behind him. This middle-aged man was the lord of the sky-gazing peak, the same person who had bestowed the 1,000-leaf lotus upon Jianchen in the past. Radiant god kings constantly hurried over to the mountains, so more and more radiant god kings gathered there. They reached over 1,000 in number. They stood in a fan-like shape, surrounding the valley as they paid close attention. Moreover, there were quite a few radiant saint masters with 5 or 6 colored soul cores as well. Jianchen did not stand out at all among them. He even failed to garner much attention. Chapter 23:38. The last 5. Jianchen stood 10 kilometers away and watched all of this coldly. Determination flooded his eyes. This time, the Grand Exalt's cultivation method would be his. No one could stop him, not even the elders who had reached the primordial realm. The difficulty in opening the miniature world was far greater than the artifact spirit had expected. The space at the bottom of the valley twisted for an entire day, and it still did not open completely. Only a fist-sized tunnel had appeared at its center. The tunnel led to the miniature world where the legacy of the former master of the Tower of Radiance resided. However, the tunnel was just too small right now. It was only the size of a fist, and it constantly twisted and collapsed, preventing people from entering it. "Changyang, why are you here as well?" Donglin Yanxue arrived beside Jianchen with her 8 retainers. She also stared at the twisting space within the valley sternly and said to Jianchen, "You have to be careful. No matter what happens, you shouldn't approach it. Although you're a great genius, your cultivation is still far too low after all. Once unexpected danger crops up, you'll struggle to protect yourself." Donglin Yanshue's voice was filled with care. Jianchen remained silent as he stared directly at the valley. He did not say anything. Donglin Yanxue and he were fated to be on different paths in life. If they were too close, he would even end up causing trouble for her. After all, he possessed martial soul force. He was a member of the martial soul lineage, and the martial soul lineage was fated to oppose the Radiant Saint Hall. At the same time, a majestic divine hall stood above the clouds on the desolate plain, looming over everything. Within a sacred hall in the divine hall, over a dozen people had gathered together. There were men and women, and they varied in age. But without a single exception, all of them gave off terrifying presences that were enough to shake up space. They were peak experts who stood at the apex of the plane, the supreme existences who could make the entire plane shake from a few simple gestures. Of course, they were not native to the desolate plane. Instead, they had gathered here from the other planes and planets across the Saint's world for the Aneta Tower. After so many years of searching, basically all the cultivators on the desolate plane have been checked. We've all personally peered into the identities of the God Kings and Infinite Primes, but we failed to find a single trace of Jianchen, said a golden-robed, burly, middle-aged man. No, we've still missed some people. Out of the God Kings, there are 3 who are undertaking trials within a miniature world, and they still haven't emerged. There are still 6 people below God King, and due to various reasons, we haven't been able to check them. If Jian Qin is on the desolate plain, he must be hiding among the 9 of them. It's just that all 9 of these people come from peak organizations on the desolate plain, and we can't put pressure the native organizations too much. After all, our actions in the past few years have already made them furious. If we really go too far, they'll start resisting, an old woman who sat before the golden-robed man said with a raspy voice. Indeed, we cannot go overboard with the native organizations. If they manage to persuade the Celestial Sword Saint and get him to stand up for them, we'll have bitten off more than we can chew. I've learnt about these 9 people in detail. We've managed to investigate the origins of 3 of them. They entered miniature worlds controlled by their clans many years ago to undertake trials, so they're unlikely to be Jian Qin. Out of the remaining 6 people, one of them is the great-grandson of a chaotic prime. He had been heavily injured, and only an incomplete soul remains. As a result, it's impossible for him to be Jian Qin either. In other words, the remaining 5 people are the most suspicious. The last 5 people come from the Radiant Saint Hall, the North River Cult, the Taoist Sect of Origins, the Chaoyang Clan, and the Dao Huang Empire. It's only 5 organizations. We might as well press them forcefully so that they hand over the 5 of them immediately. We'll be able to look into their identities. I don't think that's a good idea. Those from the Dao Huang Empire and the Chaoyang Clan have visited the Sword God Mountains several times already, requesting the Celestial Sword Saint to stand forward for them. I think we shouldn't be too unruly on the desolate plain just in case we displease the Celestial Sword Saint. We've all witnessed the Celestial Sword Saint's strength. Is there anyone who can block a strike from him? Everyone fell silent from that. Ever since they visited the Sword God Mountains together and a peak expert was almost beheaded, they had become fearful of the Celestial Sword Saint. It was also from then on that the outsiders began to hold back, no longer willing to act too recklessly on the desolate plain. In my opinion, we should split up into 5 groups and proceed to the 5 places. We can wait there. Once the 5 people emerge from the miniature worlds, we'll investigate them immediately and get to the bottom of their identities, suggested a white-robed old man after a while of thought. It looks like that's the only thing we can do right now. The experts gathered there reached an agreement very soon. They immediately set off. On the surface, they seemed like they had banded together, but this was only to stand up against the native organizations of the desolate plain. Their objective was just to find Jian Qin. Once Jian Qin was found, their relationship would immediately dissolve, and they would contend against one another for the Enata Tower. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall sat on the throne within the Radiant Saint Hall with an ugly expression. The 8 vice leaders sat below him to the 2 sides. At this moment, the 8 vice leaders sat there with sunken faces as well. They stared at the 3 men in the center with displeasure. You want to stay here for a long period of time for a disciple who hasn't taken the blood test? What do you think our Radiant Saint Hall is? Barked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Clearly he was furious. The 3 men in the center of the hall all possessed tremendous presences. They were experts at the same level as the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Please calm down, leader. We are only doing this for the first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bishing. We just want to find Jian Qin sooner so that we can hand over the Enata Tower. The 3 men smiled. They did not care about the leader's fury at all. Changyang is a Radiant Saint Master, so how can he be Jian Qin? You're looking for the wrong person, Xian Zhan growled. He was the only existence among the 8 vice leaders who dared to stand up to the 3 experts. This was because he was only a step away from the same level of cultivation. Who knows when he would break through? Who said fighters can't be Radiant Saint Masters? The martial soul lineage is the best example of that. Regardless, it's still like what we said before. Anyone, as long as they haven't been verified by us, might be Jian Qin in disguise. What logic? The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall snorted coldly. After that, a gleam of light flashed through Xian Zhan's eyes. After some thought, he stood up and said, I'll go watch over the Tower of Radiance. Vice leader Xian Zhan silently appeared on the top floor of the sacred hall. outside the Tower of Radiance. He stood there with his hands behind his back with a steady presence. He stared at the entrance of the Tower of Radiance deeply. There are only 5 people who have not been investigated on the entire desolate plain now. I never thought Chang Yang would be one of them. Is he really Jian Chen in disguise? Jian Chen is a fighter who possesses strength no less than the supreme God Kings on the God King's throne. If Chang Yang really is Jian Chen in disguise, he's both a fighter and a radiant Saint Master. That means, Xian Zhan thought to himself. All the information he knew about Chang Yang flashed through his head quickly. Afterwards, with a flip of his hand, the bottle that contained a droplet of Xian Ming's blood and the jade slip that recorded a message from Xian Ming appeared. Xian Zhan's gaze gradually deepened as he looked at the 2 items in his hands. The space within the mountain range in the Tower of Radiance continued to distort. Powerful ripples of energy shook up the surroundings. The entrance to the miniature world still had not been opened completely. Now, more and more hallowed Saint Masters had gathered in the mountain range. Many of them received the news and hurried over as quickly as they could. At least half of the radiant God Kings in the Tower of Radiance were present now. There were even more people below Radiant God King. There were figures as far as the eye could see around the mountains. They either stood on the mountains or hovered in the air, all paying attention to the bottom of the valley. At this moment, an even more powerful energy seemed to appear out of thin air. It suddenly descended with a tremendous, churning pressure, completely pouring into the bottom of the valley. With the support of this energy, the gateway seemed to be ripped open by a pair of invisible hands. It immediately became wide open. Immediately, an idyllic, heaven-like world of beauty appeared on the other side of the gateway. It was exposed before everyone without any disguise at all. At that moment, the eyes of all the hallowed Saint Masters gathered there narrowed. They studied the miniature world with shining eyes, but they all did nothing as if they were afraid of entering it. There had never been records of another miniature world hidden within the sacred pavilion throughout the history of the Radiant Saint Hall, so no one knew anything about it. As a result, they did not dare to act recklessly before confirming the place was safe. They were afraid it was a land filled with danger, which would doom them if they set foot inside. However, there was one exception. Just as all the Radiant God Kings were hesitating, a white finger condensed a pair of radiant wings and suddenly shot over like an arrow from 10 kilometers away, disappearing through the gateway as a streak of white light. Chang Yang, what are you doing? The situation inside is unknown. You can't go in. Donglin Yanshue's worried voice rang out from behind. She also condensed a pair of radiant wings to chase after him, but she was already too late to stop him. What courage! He only has a 2-colored soul core, yet he's so bold that he dares to do something we don't. Even a weaker disciple with a mere 2-colored soul core is so fearless. So what are we, Lords of Peaks, waiting for? We really are getting more and more cowardly. Go in. You can't forget this is a world within the Tower of Radiance. The Tower of Radiance is a consecrated item of our Radiant Saint Hall. It's impossible for it to cause us any harm. Like the initial collapsing domino, Jian Chen's actions urged on everyone else. Immediately, the Radiant God Kings in the surroundings called out and flew over as well, entering the miniature world. But that was not everyone. A small number of Radiant God Kings continued to hesitate. At this moment, the gateway began to shrink slowly as if it could not last for too long. After Jian Chen entered the gateway, the energy maintaining it had vanished, causing it to close up slowly. At the sight of this, all the hesitating Radiant God Kings and hallowed Saint Masters made up their minds and charged into the miniature world in a flash. Donglin Yanxue and her 8 protectors happened to be among them. 10 seconds later, the gate had closed. There were still many hallowed Saint Masters who had failed to enter the miniature world in time. The miniature world possessed beautiful mountains and clear lakes and rivers. The landscape was breathtaking. It was brimming with life as well, drastically different from the barren world outside. In the center of the miniature world stood an extremely tall stone stele that plunged right into the clouds. Like a pillar that held up the sky, it stood there quietly, keeping heaven and earth separate. It gave off an illuminating, holy light. As soon as Jianchen entered the miniature world, he was immediately attracted by the huge steel. The light in his eyes flickered as he showed excitement. At the same time, the hallowed Saint Masters who had entered the miniature world as well appeared one after another. They all stared at the glowing steel in the distance. "Changyang, you're far too reckless." At this moment, Donglin Yanshue's voice rang out from beside Jianchen. She did not pay too much attention to the steel once she entered the miniature world. Instead, she looked for Jianchen first and seemed like she was lecturing him. Jianchen looked away from the steel and at Donglin Yanshue. He frowned slightly and said, "Be careful later. Don't travel too far away from them. It's best if you stay with your auntie." Donglin Yanshue's heart immediately warmed up when she heard Jianchen's words. However, she maintained a stern expression and said, "The person who should be careful is you. You can't forget that I already have a 5-colored soul core now, while you only have a 2-colored soul core." She paused and glanced around before continuing, "There are so many radiant god kings here. Once a conflict starts, you'll struggle to protect yourself with your strength. Just the shockwaves will threaten your life. Don't travel too far away from me. Stay with me." Jianchen sighed inside from that. He glanced at Donglin Yanshue with mixed feelings and no longer said anything more aloud. Instead, he communicated with her secretly so that only she could hear him. "Donglin Yanshue, we are people who belong on separate paths in life. It's best if you sever the relationship between us. Before it was only a deal. Now that our deal has been completed, our relationship ends here as well. Everything will return to how it was before. Just treat it like you never knew me." As if she had been struck by a bolt of lightning, Donglin Yanshue jolted after hearing that. She stared at Jianchen in some confusion and said with a rather trembling voice, What did you say?" At that moment, Donglin Yanshue suddenly felt a stinging pain in her heart. "This is the best for you. You will understand very soon." With that, Jianchen directly flew towards the steel in the distance. "Master, this is the steel of ways left behind by the former master of the Tower of Radiance. His legacy imprint is suppressed beneath the steel of ways. Only by comprehending the steel and gaining its recognition can you call out the legacy." At this moment, the artifact spirit's voice rang out in Jianchen's head. The artifact spirit had expended far too much energy, making him extremely feeble. Even his voice clearly sounded weak. He would stammer as if it was extremely difficult for him to say this. "Master, I need to recover some power. I won't be able to help you with the following." With that, the artifact spirit's voice vanished completely. Chapter 2340. The Final Victor, 1. Jianchen had already arrived before the steel that seemed to hold up the sky here. He studied it carefully. The steel seemed to be made out of rock or jade. It was pure white and flawless, illuminating the surroundings with holy light. A profound power that seemed to represent the supreme laws of the world circulated within the steel, causing the people who stood before it to feel like they were facing a boundless world. They could not help but feel reverence. This steel actually isn't made out of any physical material at all. Instead, it was condensed from tremendous laws of the hallowed by the past master of the Tower of Radiance, the terrifying existence who was on par with grand exalts. No wonder it's called a steel of ways. It's a form of the power of ways. Jianchen understood the origins of the steel very soon and was immediately amazed. Using the ways of the world to condense a steel was so terrifying that superhuman could no longer describe it. Probably only grand exalts who had comprehended the laws to the limit could accomplish such an impossible task. Heavens, the entire steel is condensed from the power of the laws of the hallowed. This is just too unbelievable. Who was the one who created this steel? His grasp over the laws of the hallowed have actually reached such an unbelievable degree. I understand now. The steel was actually left behind by the master of the Tower of Radiance, the senior recorded in the annals of the Tower of Radiance. He is someone who was on par with grand exalts. Is this miniature world the place where the master of the Tower of Radiance resided? There has always been a rumor that the Tower of Radiance possesses a grand exalt's cultivation method, but no one has witnessed it in all these years. Do you think this grand exalt's cultivation method is hidden in this miniature world? At this moment, many hallowed Saint Masters gathered around the stele. They all studied it with burning interest. There were many clever people among them, so they guessed the secret of this place very soon. Donglin Yanxue had approached the stele with her 8 retainers as well. However, she did not go to find Jianchen this time. Instead, she stood beside Donglin Qiushue, looking at Jianchen from afar. She was dejected. Even the rumor of the Grand Exalt's cultivation method was unable to interest her. Yanxue, it's highly likely that an extremely impressive fortuitous encounter is hidden here. You have to make good use of this opportunity and do your best to obtain it. Donglin Qiushue's excited voice rang out. Her complete attention had been placed on the stele. She did not notice Donglin Yanxue's abnormalities. Jianchen had already sat down now. His eyes were closed as he comprehended the stele with his full efforts. He had already learnt from the artifact spirit that the Grand Exalt's legacy was suppressed beneath the stele. Only by comprehending the mysteries of the stele and gaining its recognition could one take out the legacy. Many of the hallowed Saint Masters sat down around the stele too and started comprehending its mysteries. They did not know that the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint was suppressed beneath it. They only knew the stele was completely condensed from the laws of the hallowed. It hid the endless truths of the world. As a result, even if they comprehended just a sliver of it, they would be able to benefit greatly. Of course, not everyone gathered around the stele. A portion of the hallowed Saint Masters were scattered throughout the miniature world. They searched it carefully, scouring every inch in search of a fortuitous encounter for themselves. Jianchen completely submerged himself in the comprehension of the stele. The power of laws hidden within the stele was like a tremendous ocean to him. It was boundless and immeasurable. After all, this had been left behind by a Grand Exalt. It represented the limits of the laws of the hallowed. Its depth and level were far beyond what Jianchen could touch upon. As a result, Jianchen became lost as soon as he began his comprehension. Like a lost child, he could not find his way. Fortunately, the laws of the hallowed within the stele were extremely gentle. It did not possess any hostile power at all. It was like a benevolent mother who cared for her child. Hence, no matter how weak the radiant Saint Masters were, they were not harmed at all. As a result, Jianchen found his way very soon as he was surrounded by a mysterious power. After finding his way, Jianchen immediately discovered that he could see a diagram containing the mysteries of the ways. It shone brightly, invoking everything in the world. At the same time, an ancient consciousness suddenly appeared in Jianchen's head. It revealed a piece of information. Comprehending the diagram would allow one to obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. At the same time, the hallowed Saint Masters who sat around the stele as they tried to comprehend its mysteries experienced the same thing as Jianchen. After becoming temporarily lost, they saw the diagram and received the ancient message as well, learning about the legacy. Immediately, all of them were shocked by this discovery. They ravished with joy. Yanxue, comprehend the stele, quick. There's a huge fortune hidden within the stele, Donglin Qiushue said to Donglin Yanxue in a hurry before immediately comprehending the diagram. Jianchen also comprehended the diagram that had suddenly appeared. He began to compete with the various radiant god kings in the surroundings in a battle of comprehension. At the same time, rays of light shone from the stele, enveloping all the people comprehending the diagram. The light was protective. Anyone comprehending the diagram received its protection. Time passed silently, and Jianchen's comprehension of the diagram rapidly deepened. 10%, 20%, 30%. A whole month had passed, and Jianchen had comprehended 50% of the diagram. Comprehending the diagram had nothing to do with personal strength. The mysteries within the diagram truly tested the talent and potential of a person. The greater their talent and potential, the faster they could comprehend the diagram. During this time, all the hallowed Saint Masters who were originally scattered across the miniature world discovered the secret behind the stele one after another. They all gathered around the stele, comprehending the stele to the best of their abilities. As a result, all the hallowed Saint Master who had entered the miniature world had gathered around the stele. Without any exception, all of them were in a state of comprehension, Contending for the Grand Exalt's Legacy. Chapter 2341. The Final Victor, 2, 70%, 80%. Time passed silently in the quiet miniature world. When the second month passed by, Jian Chen's comprehension of the steel had reached 80%. He only had the last 20% to go before completely comprehending the diagram. Then he would gain the steel's recognition and obtain the legacy it suppressed. 70%. It's already at 70%. Quick, I have to comprehend the last 30% as quickly as I can. At the same time, Donglin Xiaoshui gritted her teeth secretly and did her best to comprehend the remaining mysteries within the diagram. Donglin Xiaoshui was the same as Donglin Yanxue. She was also a genius and had been one of the dazzling rising stars in the Radiant Saint Hall. Her talent had also reached 9 stars, but as she had been stuck at mid-Radiant God King the entire time, her past glory gradually faded away. I've already reached 70%. There's only 30% left. I have to be the first one who comprehends the steel and obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy. The Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak was frantic inside as well. The temptation of the Grand Exalt's legacy was so great that let alone the Radiant God Kings, but even the 8 vice leaders or the very leader of the Radiant Saint Hall would not be able to resist it. They would all struggle to maintain their composure before the legacy. These Radiant God Kings had accumulated over the past several tens of thousand years. Many of them possessed impressive talent and were 9-star geniuses, and these people had comprehended 70% of the diagram. Obviously, Donglin Yanxue was among them as well. After all, comprehending the diagram tested one's talent and affinity for comprehension. It had nothing to do with personal strength. But no matter how they tried, they were still slightly slower than Jian Chen. The further they comprehended the diagram, the more difficult it became. Jian Chen had used a month to reach 50%. During the second month, he went from 50% to 80%. During the third month, he only went from 80% to 90%. He had only managed to advance by 10% in the third month. This clearly demonstrated just how many times more difficult the comprehension became towards the end. Moreover, after reaching 90%, Jian Chen's comprehension of the last 10% slowed to the speed of a snail. The difficulty of comprehending the last 10% increased once again. Unknowingly, half a year had passed since the opening of the miniature world. After half a year of comprehension, Jian Chen remained stuck within the last 10%. The last 10% was unimaginably difficult. Even with Jian Chen's talent, he failed to make any significant progress in those 3 months. Within that half a year, basically all the 9-star geniuses had reached a comprehension of 90%. All of them were stuck on the last 10%. Some of the 9-star geniuses had even stopped comprehending the diagram. The last 10% was just too difficult that they lost confidence. The diagram is just too profound. It was already like that before, but towards the end, I feel like I don't understand it at all. I was completely clueless. If I forcefully try to continue, I'll probably become lost. The Grand Exalt's legacy really isn't something that we ordinary people can try to get our hands on. In the end, our affinity for comprehension is simply too poor. Some of the hallowed Saint Masters opened their eyes. They stared at the steel before them as they seemed dispirited. A huge fortune was placed before them, but they were incapable of obtaining it. They could only let their opportunity to rise up brush past them. The psychological impact and setback from this was almost fatal. There's actually a kid with a 2-colored soul core here. He's actually still comprehending the diagram. He only has a 2-colored soul core, so his talent goes without saying. Despite that being the case, he still wants to obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy. At this moment, a hallowed Saint Master discovered Jian Chen nearby and immediately broke into laughter. I know this person. He's a low-level disciple called Chang Yang. Although his strength is nothing special, he has the support of Vice Leader Xian Zhan. It's best if we don't provoke him. A Radiant God King nearby glanced at Jian Chen and said rather cautiously. So what if he has Vice Leader Xian Zhan's support? Is the Vice Leader's support enough for him to obtain the legacy? What the joke? He only has a 2-colored soul core, yet he wants to get his hands on the Grand Exalt's legacy. He really does think big of himself. Most importantly, Changyang is only a one-star genius. He still wants to gain the recognition of the legacy with talent like that? I think he can't even comprehend 50% of the steel. Even 30% would be difficult, let alone 50%. Many hallowed Saint Masters looked at Jian Chen and scoffed. They all looked down on him and made fun of him. None of them knew that Jian Chen was the person who comprehended the diagram the fastest out of all the Radiant Saint Masters present. Very soon, another 3 months passed. Jian Chen had almost completely comprehended the entire steel. He only needed one last step. However, Jian Chen encountered an obstruction with this one last step. He always felt like there was an invisible barrier blocking him at the final juncture, and he could not overcome it no matter how he tried. Having run out of options, Jian Chen could only stop temporarily. At the same time, the several dozen 9-star geniuses followed Jian Chen closely. They had also reached the last 10%. However, they were nowhere near as fast as Jian Chen. When Jian Chen had basically comprehended the 99th percent, they had only begun to comprehend the 90th percent. The last step doesn't seem like it can be taken through comprehension alone. I feel like there needs to be some other condition, Jian Chen wondered. But at this moment, the martial soul force within him jolted silently. An extremely weak strand of it seemed to experience some sort of suction, flowing away uncontrollably. It appeared within the diagram that Jian Chen had comprehended silently, charging towards the barrier blocking Jian Chen's final step. Before the martial soul force, the barrier burst like a bubble, immediately clearing Jian Chen's path for comprehension. As soon as the barrier vanished, Jian Chen's comprehension of the diagram reached completion. He had comprehended all of it. Immediately, he gained the recognition of the steel. Under the guidance of the power within the steel, a strand of the senses of his soul was brought below it. Jian Chen saw a dazzling imprint. The Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Jian Chen immediately recognized the imprint. In the instance Jian Chen established contact with the imprint, the diagram within the steel suddenly vanished. All the hallowed Saint Masters who were still comprehending the diagram had been forced out by a power from the steel. What has happened? Why can't I comprehend the diagram? God damn it. I had already reached 90%. I was only 10% away from success. The diagram has actually vanished, and the senses of my soul are unable to enter the steel. What has happened? Everyone roused and they cursed in regret. All of them were utterly furious. Look, there's still a beam of light that hasn't vanished. At this moment, a cry rang out in disbelief and shock. As the voice rang out, everyone immediately looked over, and their eyes narrowed at the sight before them. All those who had been comprehending the steel were protected by its power, preventing any external interruptions. When they had been forced out by the power of the steel, the beam of light that protected them had vanished. However, one still remained right now. What did this mean? It meant that there was still one person comprehending the steel and had not been pushed out by the power. Impossible. How is he still protected by the steel? Has he already comprehended the steel entirely? How is that possible? Like a domino effect, all the hallowed Saint Masters stood up and experienced a multitude of emotions. Many of their eyes turned bloodshot with burning envy as well as undisguised desire. The radiant Saint Masters in the surroundings could not help but gather around together, forming a huge circle around Jian Chen. They all stared at him as he continued to comprehend the diagram while under the steel's protection. At that moment, Jian Chen had become the center of attention. Originally, Jian Chen did stand out at all with his two-colored soul core in this crowd of radiant god kings. In fact, he did not receive any attention at all. He was someone insignificant who could have been forgotten accidentally. But now, everyone focused on him. Who is this person? He only has a two-colored soul core, yet he hasn't been pushed out by the power of the steel. Is his talent greater than all of ours? That's impossible. Changyang was only tested to be a 1-star genius. How could he exceed us? There are many 9-star geniuses among us here, but we've all been pushed out by the power of the steel. Only Changyang remains in a state of cultivation. Is Changyang's talent really greater than all of ours? Are you saying that Chang Yang has surpassed 9-star geniuses? This. The radiant Saint Masters discussed with one another. Many of their gazes towards Jian Chen flickered. Donglin Yanxue stood beside Donglin Xiaoshui as she looked at the determined Jian Chen with mixed feelings. Within the radiant Saint Hall, she was the only person who knew about Jian Chen's true talent. As a result, she had always believed that Jian Chen possessed the most right in obtaining the legacy. As a result, she was the only unsurprised person present after witnessing this. As a matter of fact, she believed that this was supposed to be. I sure have underestimated Chang Yang. Donglin Xiaoshui also sighed in amazement. How can he obtain a Grand Exalt's legacy so easily? Sure, he's still comprehending the diagram, but that doesn't mean he'll definitely get the legacy, barked a radiant God King enviously from within the crowd. However, just when he finished speaking, the protective power vanished silently. At that moment, Jian Chen became just like everyone else. He had lost the protection of the steel. Many of the radiant God Kings present let out sighs of relief when they saw that. Naturally, they believed that Jian Chen was the same as him. They thought he had failed and been forced out by the power of the steel. However, before they could celebrate, a heavy, primordial presence filled with age suddenly appeared and enveloped the surroundings. The hearts of all the radiant God Kings shuddered under the influence of this primordial presence. They all looked over with narrowed eyes. A dazzling ball of light suddenly flew out from beneath the steel. It was only the size of a fist, but it possessed the presence of the laws of the world. It shone with dazzling light, illuminating the entire place. It's the Grand Exalt's legacy. Heavens, it's actually the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. It went without saying that all the hallowed Saint Master gathered here knew what the ball of light was. However, the power of laws were just too dense. As soon as it appeared, it interfered with the laws in the surroundings, affecting the order there. The various phenomena clearly demonstrated that this was the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Immediately, everyone's eyes turned bloodshot as their hearts thumped heavily. Immediately, some of the hallowed Saint Masters were overcome by their greed, and they flew towards the Grand Exalt's legacy as quickly as they could. Grand Exalts were the undisputed sovereigns of the world. They were the most powerful existences, so their legacies were naturally the most powerful and most terrifying. It was a fortune enough to change a person's fate. No one could resist its temptation. At this moment, no one paid attention to Jian Chen anymore, nor did anyone consider why the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint had appeared. The only thought that remained in their heads was to obtain it regardless of the price. However, just when they charged towards the imprint without any regard, it turned into a streak of light and arrived before Jian Chen like the distance between them never even existed in the first place. It hovered there silently with dazzling light. Jian Chen's eyes opened slowly at that moment as well. He stood up steadily and glanced at the crazed hallowed Saint Master indifferently. He grabbed the imprint casually. The Grand Exalt's legacy was actually an imprint of consciousness. It contained information left behind by the previous master of the Tower of Radiance. As Jian Chen grasped the imprint, he could clearly feel that a tremendous amount of information was stored within it. However, when all the hallowed Saint Masters saw Jian Chen grab the imprint with such ease, they were taken aback. However, they all bellowed out soon afterwards. Hand over the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. The Grand Exalt's legacy imprint isn't something you can possess. Hand it over, Chang Yang, give me what's in your hand. I'll give you my space ring in exchange. It contains all the wealth I've managed to accumulate in the past 300,000 years. All the radiant God Kings charged towards Jian Chen in a crazed manner. They directly targeted the legacy imprint in Jian Chen's hand. Many of them even condensed radiant swords, swinging them towards Jian Chen's arm. They surged with killing intent. Some people even formed seals with both hands, condensing huge hands out of radiant saint force that fell on Jian Chen. They wanted to take Jian Chen away. This was a Grand Exalt's legacy. Obtaining it would mean rising up. The temptation was far too great. All these radiant God Kings had forgotten about how it was forbidden to kill other disciples within the Radiant Saint Hall as a result. At this moment, laws of the hallowed, even more powerful than what most radiant god kings possessed, suddenly appeared, condensing into a huge hand. It swung towards over a dozen of the radiant god kings that charged towards Jianchen before reaching towards Jianchen with even greater speed. The hand belonged to the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak, one of the 99 main peaks. Before the Grand Exalt's legacy, he also struggled to resist the temptation. He began to take part in the action. Chang Yang, give the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint to me. I'll keep you safe. Donglin Qiushui struck out as well. She was also the lord of one of the 99 main peaks. She kept the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak busy as she rapidly approached Jianchen. The Grand Exalt's legacy imprint is mine. A cold snort rang out. A young man who seemed to be in his 20s appeared behind Jianchen silently. He had already reached out with lightning speed, arriving near Jianchen in a single instance. The young man was extremely powerful as well. He was also a lord of one of the 99 main peaks, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak. His individual strength was no less than Donglin Qiushui, or the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak. Chapter 2343. Overwhelming an entire group. 1. They were not the only one who tried to lay their hands on Jianchen. All the hallowed Saint Masters gathered there actually flew towards Jianchen with lightning speed. Every single one of them had become crazed. They seized every single second available to them as if whoever got to Jianchen first would obtain the Grand Exalt's legacy. After all, there were many radiant god kings gathered here. There were even the lords of the 99 main peaks who had remained as mid-radiant god kings for far too long. With Jianchen's two-colored soul core, none of them took him seriously. From their perspective, he was just waiting for people to divide him up as they wished. However, despite being surrounded by so many radiant god kings, Jianchen clenched the imprint and remained completely composed. Even though he was completely surrounded, and there were many radiant god kings no weaker than the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak, he felt no fear at all. At this moment, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak's large, powerful hand had arrived 3 inches away from Jianchen's shoulder. A few other powerful hallowed Saint Masters were just as close to Jianchen. They were about to grab the imprint in Jianchen's hand. Moreover, over a dozen radiant swords that shone with dazzling lights were about to land on Jianchen's arm with the power of the laws of the hallowed. There were even several large hands condensed from radiant saint force that were sinking down with great force. These attacks that came in from everywhere had already formed a jail. It sealed off all of Jianchen's paths of retreat, locking him in completely. Anyone who saw this would definitely think he was doomed. It was impossible for him to escape. Chang Yang! Donglin Yanshue's cries rang out in the distance. She could not help but pale in fright when she saw that Jianchen was in danger. Quick, save Chang Yang. Don't let him suffer any harm at all. Donglin Yanshue immediately ordered the 8 retainers beside her. The 8 retainers did not hesitate at all. Before Donglin Yanshue had even finished talking, they flew over in a hurry. However, desire burned in their eyes as well. They looked at Jianchen with greed. Clearly, the 8 retainers had no intention of helping Jianchen. They too could not resist the temptation of the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. They joined in on the fight. Jianchen could not help but sneer when he saw so many people fight for the Grand Exalt's legacy in his hand. With a single movement, space pulsed, and he vanished from the encirclement. At such a crucial time, he used the laws of space. He basically teleported away from everyone's attacks, appearing outside the encirclement. Boom! All the attacks from the Radiant God Kings missed. Countless attacks landed on the ground, producing a deafening boom and kicking up dust into the air. Several Radiant swords shot towards the opposing ground, forcing back many weaker Radiant God Kings. It was an utter mess. Since I've already obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, it means that I'm fated to have it. If you try to take it forcefully, you're disobeying the will of the Grand Exalt, Jianchen called out coldly from nearby as he held the imprint. He could not put the legacy into his space ring, and he did not have the time to absorb the information within it either. As a result, he could only hold it in his hand. However, when everyone looked at the dazzling imprint that was accompanied by the power of laws, Their desires were only aggravated. They lost all rationality and went crazy. Changyang, that's not something you should obtain. Hand it over. You only have a two-colored soul core, yet you dare to say you're fated to possess the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint? You really are shameless. Hand over the legacy, or die. The presences of all the Radiant God Kings surged as they continued to charge towards Jianchen aggressively. For the sake of the legacy, for the sake of an opportunity to rise up, all of them became crazed. They would even go as far as killing for it. All of them had basically lost their minds. As a result, they failed to realize just how Jianchen had managed to break out from their encirclement earlier. With a flash, Jianchen avoided their attacks effortlessly. As he saw the raging desire within everyone's eyes, his gaze gradually turned cold. At this moment, powerful laws of the hallowed descended. Donglin Xiushui had struck out once again from behind Jianchen, condensing a radiant sword and swinging it towards Jianchen's hand without any hesitation at all. "Auntie, don't." Donglin Yanxue immediately grabbed Donglin Xiushui's hand as she pleaded with a terrified face. "Move!" Donglin Xiushui called out as her eyes burned with desire. She suddenly shook her arm, and with her cultivation as a mid-god king, she shook off Donglin Yanxue easily. Then she attacked Jianchen mercilessly. At this moment, no one could remember the rules of the Radiant Saint Hall, nor could they remember Vice Leader Xianzhan who stood behind Jianchen. Obtaining the legacy had become the only goal for everyone present. Donglin Yanxue was filled with worry when she saw how Jianchen was surrounded. Only she did not care about the Grand Exalt's legacy out of everyone present. She only felt worried about Jianchen. Suddenly, determination flooded Donglin Yanshue's eyes. She took out an ancient glyph from her space ring. After activating it, a powerful pulse of energy appeared, which turned into a barrier of energy around her. Afterwards, she arrived before Jianchen under the protection of the barrier and pulled Jianchen in. She used the power of the talisman to block all the incoming attacks. "Changyang, let's go." "I can't last for very long," Donglin Yanxue called out in worry before fleeing into the distance without even asking for Jianchen's response. However, she became stunned very soon, and her expression turned horrendous. The gate out of the miniature world had already closed. They could not leave. No matter how they fled, they would remain trapped in the miniature world. They would not be able to escape from the Radiant God Kings. Booms constantly rang out outside the energy barrier. Powerful pulses of energy wreaked havoc in the miniature world as the Radiant God Kings struck out while bellowing out crazily, attacking the barrier of energy. They reduced this picturesque miniature world to a waste. The talisman had been bestowed upon Donglin Yanxue after she became the chosen saint. It had impressive power, enough to block attacks from primordial realm experts. But the power within the talisman deleted rapidly under the continuous attacks from all these Radiant God Kings. It could not last for very long. "Donglin Yanxue, you shouldn't have helped me." Jianchen remained calm within the barrier, except his gaze towards Donglin Yanxue bore a sliver of helplessness. "I don't care. I just can't let anything happen to you," Donglin Yanxue said stubbornly. From when Jianchen obtained the legacy to when he became encircled, it had all happened too quickly, so quickly that many people were unable to react. As a result, Donglin Yanxue failed to take notice of how Jianchen had managed to avoid all the attacks. Subconsciously, she still believed that Jianchen only had a two-colored soul core and had yet to mature into a prodigy of impressive strength. Chapter 2344, Overwhelming an Entire Group, 2, were people on separate paths in life. Jianchen sighed secretly. Donglin Yanxue remained silent. She gritted her teeth as she paid close attention to the situation outside. Suddenly, a powerful pressure appeared. A meter-long sword shot out, stabbing the barrier heavily with chilling killing intent. Boom! The energy barrier immediately shook. The might of the attack was simply too terrifying. The power of the talisman was rapidly depleted after taking this strike. God artifact. It's actually a god artifact. Many Radiant God Kings cried out after the god artifact appeared. Unsurprisingly, the sword was a low-quality god artifact. Low-quality god artifacts were precious, and even many primordial realm experts did not possess them. However, many of these radiant god kings had either great status or origins, or they had their own fortuitous encounters in the past. As a result, a few of them possessed god artifacts. Once the first god artifact appeared, a second, third, and fourth appeared as well. They all gave off soaring power, striking the barrier with chilling killing intent. These god artifacts had extraordinary power. Even though the radiant god kings were nowhere close to unleashing their complete power, they were still a force to be reckoned with. The barrier shook even more when it faced the attacks of several god artifacts, and the talisman rapidly dimmed as well. A crack seemed to have appeared. At this moment, a few more people drew their god artifacts. A total of 10 god artifacts of varying shapes and sizes struck the barrier with enough power to shake up the world. Donglin Yanxue immediately paled. The talisman's effective time became even shorter before all these god artifacts. There was nothing she could do about it. However, Jianchen remained composed beside her. He looked at Donglin Yanxue with mixed feelings and said, "Actually, if you pay close attention, you will realize these people can't harm me at all. Even if they all work together, even if they wield god artifacts, they still pose no threat to me because they are far too weak in my eyes. I told you before. We are people on separate paths in life, but you still failed to understand the meaning behind it. You should be able to understand it completely now," Jianchen said slowly. At the same time, the barrier from Donglin Yanshue's talisman finally shattered from the consecutive attacks of 10 god artifacts. The great power turned into a terrifying storm that surged out with devastating power. Even radiant god kings with 7-colored soul cores would have to avoid such a powerful storm of energy, let alone Donglin Yanxue with her 5-colored soul core. The storm of energy created from a total of 10 god artifacts was extremely terrifying. It was enough to cause all the radiant god kings to pale in fright. After the storm of energy had swept out, the 10 god artifacts whistled over once more directly towards Jianchen and Donglin Yanxue. They showed no mercy at all. The people in control of the 10 god artifacts were crazed. They would even go as far as killing the chosen saint for the Grand Exalt's legacy. They could truly do anything under the temptation of the Grand Exalt's legacy. They would even be willing to kill people even more important than the chosen saint. Jianchen snorted coldly when he saw this. Iciness immediately filled his eyes. Originally, he did not want to harm these radiant god kings. After all, he had remained in the Radiant Saint Hall for such a long time. He did not want to go too overboard. However, now that the people in control of the god artifacts did not even want to spare Donglin Yanxue, he had been truly angered. He took a step forward, blocking Donglin Yanxue with his slender body. He allowed the shocking energy to strike his body while he stood as still as a mountain. In that instance, Jianchen's rather tiny body felt as imposing as a mountain, seemingly immovable. At the same time, he gave off a shocking presence. Turbulent energy circulated within him. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt. At this moment he no longer hid. He exposed his edge. A strand of dazzling sword chi shot out from the tip of Jianchen's finger. It gave off a surging presence, and with a single flash, the sword chi turned into a sword and collided with 6 god artifacts. Clang! The sword chi collided with the god artifacts and produced a clear screech. The 6 god artifacts that possessed enough power to strike fear in the hearts of all the radiant god kings was like a child's plaything before Jianchen's sword chi. They were knocked far away, striking the ground heavily and causing the ground to tremble. Afterwards, the sword chi broke free from Jianchen's hand, shooting off as a streak of light that collided with one of the god artifacts in the air loudly. The 7th god artifact produced a miserable thrum and vanished into the horizon. Who knows where it had been knocked away to? In the end, Jianchen condensed the laws of strength and threw out 3 consecutive punches. The power was terrifying and shocking, making space tremble. He struck the 3 last god artifacts in the most violent fashion possible. Bang, bang, bang. With the 3 deafening sounds, the last 3 god artifacts dimmed from Jianchen's punches. They all produced miserable thrums as if the artifact spirits were wailing out. The three god artifacts were knocked far away, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The expressions of the three radiant god kings who wielded these god artifacts changed drastically. Blood sprayed from their mouths as they all paled. Shock filled their eyes. The three of them possessed a mental connection with their god artifacts, and the god artifacts had received a violent blow from Jian Qin. The power was far too terrifying and shocking that the three of them could not avoid being affected as well. They were heavily injured as a result. The storm had not subsided just yet. After the three low-quality god artifacts were blown away, various radiant god kings used a number of radiant arts to send a white barrage of attacks towards Jian Qin. Jian Qin's gaze was cold. He stood in front of Donglin Yanxue as he faced the barrage alone. With a wave of his hand, sharp sword chi permeated the surroundings and shot out as a white screen. The screen obliterated all and was unstoppable. It turned all the attacks from the radiant god kings to pieces. In a single instance, the threat from the 10 god artifacts and the attacks of the various radiant god kings had been cleanly resolved by Jian Qin. All the radiant god kings, including the ones who wielded god artifacts, had failed to even touch Jian Qin. In the blink of an eye, the miniature world quietened down. Everyone in the miniature world stared at Jian Qin blankly like he was a ghost. None of them launched any more attacks. Donglin Yanshue's eyes widened as well. She stared at Jian Qin in shock and disbelief as her mind blanked out. The basically invincible strength that Jian Qin displayed left Donglin Qiushue, the lord of the sky-gazing peak, and the other lords of the 99 main peaks speechless. They all stared at him at a loss as they were filled with shock. They struggled to believe what had just happened. "Why, you're a part of the martial soul lineage." Suddenly, a cry rang out from the crowd. As soon as those words rang out, the faces of everyone changed drastically. Afterwards, their gazes towards Jian Qin became filled with intense surprise and hatred. Some of them even staggered backwards uncontrollably. They immediately paled, and their eyes became filled with fear. The martial soul lineage was piercing to everyone's ears, as not only were they composed of an extremely small group of different Radiant Saint Masters, but they also had deep grievances with the Radiant Saint Hall. This grievance was so deep that they could no longer reconcile with each other. It had already reached the point where they would be at each other's throats at every encounter. Moreover, Qing Shan of the martial soul lineage had intruded on the world of Moon and Star during the first trial for the selection of the chosen saint. He hunted down everyone there in a devastating manner. Not only did he claim Elder He Tian's life, but many other protectors had died to his hands as well. It was a heavy loss for the Radiant Saint Hall. As a result, all the Radiant Saint Masters felt very deep fear towards the people of the martial soul lineage along with their hatred. The martial soul lineage had a total of 7 people, but every single one of them was extremely powerful. Not only were they invincible among the same level of cultivation with their martial soul force, but they could also challenge or even kill those at higher cultivation levels. It was extremely terrifying. Not only was Jian Qin a Radiant Saint Master with a 2-colored soul core, but he had also exposed his great strength as a fighter right now. He was both a Radiant Saint Master and a fighter. If he did not possess martial soul force, what did he possess? As a result, as soon as Jian Qin exposed his identity as part of the martial soul lineage, he immediately scared away the Radiant Saint Masters who feared the martial soul lineage. Qing Shan. He's Qing Shan. We've all been tricked. Chang Yang is only his disguise. His true identity is actually Qing Shan of the martial soul lineage. At this moment, another terrified cry rang out. These words shocked everyone. Even the eyes of Donglin Yanxue widened as she stared at Jian Qin's back in disbelief. What? Chang Yang is actually Qing Shan in disguise? How is this possible? The Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak and Donglin Qiushue were stunned as well. The martial soul lineage only has 7 people, and Qing Shan is the only one at God King among the 7 of them. The rest of them have all reached the primordial realm. Chang Yang's strength completely matches Qing Shan's, so who else can he be? Said Radiant God King coldly. A god artifact hovered above his head, shining with light as it gave off a great pressure. He was very powerful. After learning Jian Chen's identity, not only did he feel no fear, but he even surged with battle intent instead. No, Chang Yang is not Qing Shan. I saw the real Qing Shan in the world of Moon and Star. Chang Yang and Qing Shan are clearly two different people, Donglin Yanxue explained for Jian Chen loudly. However, the radiant God King with the God artifact snorted coldly in response, "You've been tricked. Maybe when you saw Chang Yang and Qing Shan, it was only Qing Shan's original body and a clone. With Qing Shan's strength, you obviously won't be able to see through his tricks if he got a clone to fool you." Moreover, the place where the trial was held was so obscure. Even among our Radiant Saint Hall, barely anyone knew about it. How did Qing Shan locate the world of Moon and Star with such precision as an outsider? But it all makes sense now. He was clearly working with a clone of his. That was how he found the world of Moon and Star accurately. The Radiant God King argued and gained the secret agreement of many Radiant God Kings nearby. Even some people who had doubts about Jian Chen's identity gradually believed that he was Qing Shan. That makes sense. So many Radiant God Kings died in the trial last time. Only a single chosen saint was left alive. Donglin Yanxue and Chang Yang were actually able to return alive despite such weak cultivations. That's already suspicious. Now that you look at it, it's clearly a show that Chang Yang put on. "He's Qing Shan," someone else said loudly. None of the people present had considered the possibility of Jian Chen being the 8th person to possess martial soul force. After all, far too few people belonged to the martial soul lineage. Impossible. Donglin Yanxue struggled to accept this. As if she had been struck by something, she rapidly retreated while shaking her head in dejection. She pulled away from Jian Chen. "It doesn't matter whether I'm Qing Shan or not. What is important is that I hold no ill intentions towards any of you, or you wouldn't still be standing around right now. I've only come for the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint," Jian Chen said at this moment. He was very indifferent, but his words were believable. He did not try to explain his identity. After all, there was no doubt about his possession of martial soul force. As long as he possessed martial soul force, he belonged to the martial soul lineage, and the martial soul lineage had always opposed the Radiant Saint Hall. As a result, he had no need to continue explaining. No matter what he said, he would remain as the greatest enemy in the eyes of these Radiant Saint Masters. He was a target that they had to kill. The Grand Exalt's legacy imprint is the greatest fortune of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't let it end up in the hands of the martial soul lineage no matter what. Once the martial soul lineage obtains the Grand Exalt's legacy, the outcome will be unthinkable. Everyone attack together and kill Chang Yang. This is directly related to the survival of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't be selfish. Everyone stand together and take back the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. That's right. Our Radiant Saint Hall faces the greatest threat yet. We must stand together. We can let anyone take the Grand Exalt's legacy, but we can't let the martial soul lineage take it, or we're doomed. Righteous and encouraging calls rang out from the crowd. The unyielding spirit to stand and fight within the Radiant Saint Masters seemed to be awakened. They all overcame their fears and radiated with battle intent. They charged towards Jian Chen without any fear of death. In the distance, the god artifacts that Jian Chen had knocked away returned. The 10 god artifacts united once again, hurling towards Jian Chen with soaring power. A member of the martial soul lineage has snuck into the most sacred place of our Radiant Saint Hall, the Tower of Radiance. If we don't kill this person, we'll never be able to redeem ourselves from the humiliation. No one hold back. Unleash your full strength. With that, a few more presences that belonged to god artifacts appeared among the group. Another 6 people drew their god artifacts, sending them towards Jian Chen aggressively. Donglin Qiushui happened to be one of those people. Her god artifact was a faint blue sword. The sword had been bestowed upon her by a senior within the Donglin clan. The attack this time was even more violent than the last. People before were only contending for the Grand Exalt's legacy, so they did hold back slightly. But now they used all their strength to kill. They were merciless. As a result, the attacks this time were several times greater than before. The 16 low-quality god artifact cut open a path as streaks of light. Terrifying energy shook up the surroundings as the killing intent became almost tangible. It all targeted Jianqin. Behind the 16 god artifacts were the radiant arts from the various radiant god kings. The attacks came in all kinds of shapes and sizes, merging together into a wall of white that engulfed Jianqin. Moreover, many radiant god kings had fallen into a formation, powering it together. They launched attacks towards Jianqin that were far more powerful than anything they could unleash alone. At this moment, Jianqin was truly surrounded. He faced attacks from all sides. Alone, he faced the most violent attacks from all the radiant god kings. Moreover, they were hallowed saint masters. They had comprehended the laws of the hallowed, making their battle prowess even greater than fighters at the same level. Chapter 2346. The Grand Exalt's Descendant. 1. Jianqin remained calm as he faced this barrage of attacks. He stood there leisurely without losing his composure at all. A resplendent light surged from his body as light gathered in from the surroundings. It was from the power of the laws of the sword. It engulfed Jianqin, causing him to seemingly become a sword in that moment. Afterwards, he used his body as a sword and went to receive the incoming god artifacts. Sword chi pierced through the air as all the light in the world seemed to darken, replaced by the light from Jianqin. He seemed like the only existence there. Boom! With a deafening sound, Jianqin collided with the god artifacts while surrounded by light. Immediately, several dimming god artifacts were blasted away. Jianqin hovered in the air above everyone. The light around him did not dim at all. Instead, it shone with even greater splendor. He seemed invincible. The other god artifacts could not help but separate and attack Jianqin from all directions after witnessing how powerful he was. Jianqin's eyes were cold. The laws of the sword condensed, gathering into a strand of sword chi on his fingertip. He stabbed out 9 times in a single instance as the sword chi shone with blinding light. Every single strike had astonishing might as if possessing endless power. Every single strike moved with lightning speed, leaving behind blurs. He stabbed out 9 times in a single instance, striking the last 9 god artifacts that came flying in from all directions with perfect precision. He was so fast that no one present managed to react to it. This was because even the experts like the lords of the 99 main peaks were unable to see Jianqin stab out even with the senses of their souls. Boom! 9 booms seemed to merge into one. Jianqin had blown away the remaining god artifacts. They dimmed. Afterwards, Jianqin jolted, and the light that had condensed around him suddenly shattered. It turned into a myriad of soybean-sized specks that hovered around him. Jianqin extended his finger, and the specks of light immediately shot off. Like a meteor shower, they rapidly approached the attacks from the radiant saint masters with sharp sword chi. Immediately, the wall of radiant swords and other radiant arts condensed from the laws of the hallowed seemed to be a piece of paper before Jianqin's barrage. They were all ripped to pieces, unable to approach him at all. Within the entire world, there is none unvanquished. Energy suppressing formation, suppress. At the same time, over a dozen radiant god kings worked together to create a formation. It radiated with powerful energy as it fell towards Jianqin. Jianqin hovered in the air, allowing the violent storm of energy to batter his body. It made his hair flutter and his clothes ruffle. He seemed invincible. He swung his right hand, and a strand of sword chi several meters in length shot through the air, striking the formation. Boom! Immediately, the formation shattered, and the radiant god kings who supported it suffered an intense backlash. Blood sprayed from their mouths as they paled. Afterwards, a few more strands of sword chi shot through the air, shattering the few other formations. In a single instance, Jianqin had destroyed the combined attacks of all the radiant god kings effortlessly. He was just too powerful right now, so powerful that he could kill a few regular primordial realm experts. On the other hand, the most powerful ones here were only mid-radiant god kings. The disparity in strength was just too great. Even when they all worked together with over a dozen god artifacts, they were unable to make up for this huge difference. So powerful! Changyang is far too powerful. Even the god artifacts can't deal with him. How are we supposed to defeat him, god damn it? He still has the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Are we just supposed to watch someone from the martial soul lineage take away the greatest treasure of our Radiant Saint Hall and do nothing? Many Radiant God Kings became dumbfounded with that. Jian Chen's strength had exceeded all of their imaginations. Despite the gathering of so many Radiant God Kings and over a dozen god artifacts, they had failed to even touch him. How were they supposed to fight him like that? How were they supposed to take back the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint? Stop wasting your efforts. You're not my opponent, said Jian Chen from high in the air. Although his voice was calm, the terrifying presence he gave off weighed on the hearts of everyone present. Although you have over a dozen god artifacts, you're all far too weak. You can't unleash the power of the god artifacts at all, so you pose no threat to me. Harming me will be very difficult. All the Radiant God Kings fell silent from that. The faces of all the lords of the main peaks with the god artifacts sank and became ugly. Donglin Xiushui and the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak experienced mixed feelings. They had never thought that the Changyang they had once interacted with would possess such terrifying battle prowess. It made them feel powerless. Donglin Yanxue stood in the distance as she stared at the invincible Jian Chen blankly. She too experienced very mixed feelings. It's far too early to jump to conclusions. The Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak snorted coldly. He stared at Jian Chen with killing intent while his presence rose. It surpassed the level of Mid-God King very soon. The Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak is actually breaking through. Gong Sun Ji is far too reckless. The mist within the Tower of Radiance hasn't dispersed entirely. He can't hide here forever. Isn't he afraid of that great demon? Cries immediately rang out in the surroundings. Unsurprisingly, the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji, had chosen to break through to late God King at a time like this. Originally, there needed to be a period of time before mid-God Kings could break through to late God King. However, the lords of the 99 peaks had all kept their cultivations suppressed for tens of thousands of years or even longer. They had already reached the limits of their cultivation level. Breaking through only required a single thought. That was the exact reason why Gong Sun Ji completed his breakthrough in a matter of seconds. He was completely unobstructed. Gong Sun Ji's strength immediately increased several times over with his breakthrough. Even if you become late God Kings, you're still not my opponent. Jian Chen glanced past them indifferently. What bold words. No matter how powerful you are, you're still a God King. I'm at the same level of cultivation as you now, said the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak as he snorted coldly. He formed a seal with both hands and used a secret technique. White flames suddenly sprang up and roared on his body. As the flames burned, Gong Sun Ji's presence immediately began to rise once again. It rose even faster than when he broke through. However, he became paler and paler. He became haggard as his life force became weaker and weaker. Clearly, he had used a forbidden technique. He had paid a huge price in exchange for strength beyond what he was supposed to possess. Jian Chen also frowned slightly at this moment. He did not look at Gong Sun Ji. Instead, he looked at the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint in his hand. The imprint had suddenly become scorching. It trembled in his hand as if it was trying to break free. Chapter 2347. The Grand Exalt's Descendant, 2. Staring at the trembling imprint that was trying to break free from his grasp, Jian Chen's eyes shone brightly. He became both surprised and doubtful. Afterwards, he glanced at the distance, looking past the group of radiant Saint Masters. The light in his eyes flickered. He was uncertain about the reason behind the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint behaving like this, wanting to fly off by itself. However, there was something he was certain about. He knew that the sudden behavior of the imprint was related to a radiant Saint Master among them. Whatever. Our priority is to protect the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. At this moment, another person called out. Another hallowed Saint Master who had reached the limits of Mid-God King began to break through. He became a late God King resolutely. He was also one of the lords of the 99 peaks. He was powerful, having suppressed his cultivation at Mid-God King for a very long time. His breakthrough at this moment was effortless, completed in a matter of seconds. Moreover, he was also one of the 16 God Kings who wielded God artifacts. The bold breakthroughs of the two and their fearless spirit influenced many of the nearby radiant God Kings. After seeing that, they all bellowed out in high spirits. The mist of the Tower of Radiance will completely disperse before long. At that time, we'll be able to stay in the Tower of Radiance for long periods of time. There's no need to worry about that great demon. We have nothing to worry about. Only by becoming late God Kings can we unleash more of the God artifact's power and deal with the threat of Qin Shan. Immediately, powerful presences burst out one after another. At that moment, many radiant God Kings made up their minds. They all broke through. Of course, every single person who broke through in that instance had kept their cultivation suppressed for many years. They had already reached late God King in terms of comprehension, so breaking through only required a thought for them. They met no obstructions or difficulties. Of course, not all of them were like that. Basically, every single person who possessed such a cultivation was a lord of the 99 main peaks. Donglin Qiushui sighed gently. At that moment, she could only break through reluctantly, or she would become a joke within the Radiant Saint Hall as one of the 99 lords of main peaks. She would be known as someone who feared death if she did not. Even the Donglin clan behind her would probably be humiliated. In that short moment, over 40 late Radiant God Kings appeared. Almost half of the 99 lords of main peaks had broken through. Kill, take back the imprint. The lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji, bellowed out. He ignited his essence blood, burning his vitality to unleash more power from his God artifact. He charged towards Jian Qin aggressively. After Gong Sun Ji, the 15 other wielders of God artifacts all used secret techniques to boost their cultivation at quite a hefty cost. They unleashed even more power from their God artifacts and attacked Jian Qin simultaneously. Unless you break though again by condensing a soul tree and reach the primordial realm, you still pose no threat to me, Jian Qin said coldly. Even though these people had grown more powerful, even though the God artifacts were stronger than before, he still did not take them seriously. He only took a single step, and he crossed the several-kilometer distance to appear before them like he had teleported. He did not use the laws of the sword this time. Instead, he directly threw a punch. Not only did the punch contain the power of his chaotic body, but it also possessed the laws of strength. Under the amplification of the laws of strength, the shocking punch became even more terrifying. The punch shot out and caused space to rupture. He directly struck a God artifact, sending it back to where it came from. The weapon pierced its master's chest. Afterwards, Jian Qin threw out consecutive punches. The power was extremely terrifying, causing space to tremble. All 16 God artifacts were knocked back, causing them to dim. Aside from Donglin Qiushui, all the other God artifact wielders had been knocked away while blood sprayed from their mouths. However, at this moment, certain globules of the fallen blood directly flew towards Jian Qin as if it was under the guidance of some mysterious power. More correctly, it flew towards the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint in Jian Qin's hand. A gleam of light flashed through Jian Qin's eyes. He clenched the imprint tightly in his left hand as he sent out a strand of sword chi with his right. He cut the globule to pieces before incinerating it all with chaotic flames. Even though the blood had been burnt to nothingness, Jian Qin could still sense an invisible power that managed to survive. It could not be found with the senses of his soul. He only managed to discover it with his special soul. It was absorbed by the imprint in his hand. Immediately, the imprint shone brightly as it became even more scorching. It shook violently in Jian Qin's hand. The Grand Exalt's legacy was an imprint of consciousness, yet in that moment, Jian Qin actually felt like the imprint of consciousness had sprung alive after absorbing the power from the blood. You're actually the one who's making the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint tremble. Jian Qin suddenly looked at Gong Sun Ji. He was shocked because the blood from earlier came from Gong Sun Ji. However, after Gong Sun Ji's blood was incinerated by the chaotic flames, even the mysterious power had become extremely thin. It was even so thin that the power of the bloodline within it had almost collapsed. However, Gong Sun Ji's face changed drastically. He stared at the imprint in Jian Chen's hand in shock before ravishing in joy. He was overjoyed. This was because he had suddenly discovered that an extremely obscure connection seemed to be established between him and the imprint. At this moment, the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint in Jian Chen's hand struggled even more. It seemed to have become a scathing brand, doing all it could to break free from Jian Chen's control. Although Jian Chen had passed the test and removed the imprint from the steel, the imprint did not seem to recognize Jian Chen anymore. The resistance from the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint became greater and greater. Jian Chen knew that if this continued, the imprint would break free from his grasp in the end. He bellowed out and no longer paid any more attention to the Radiant Saint Masters. Instead, he suddenly pressed the imprint against the area between his eyes and began to accept what was inside. However, he encountered resistance. The consciousness within the imprint rejected Jian Chen's entry as if it did not accept him. Jian Chen snorted coldly inside and used martial soul force. A strand of it flowed under his control and approached the imprint. As expected, as soon as it sensed the approach of the martial soul force, the consciousness within the imprint no longer stood in his way, letting him in. Jian Chen's soul immediately took advantage of the situation and entered, permeating the imprint. He sensed the tremendous information inside. He did two things at the same time. As he comprehended and absorbed the information within the imprint, he suppressed the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint with all that he had. This was because the imprint constantly shook. It wanted to break free from Jian Chen's restraint at all times. He has already begun accepting the legacy. Quick, kill him. Gong Sun Ji's eyes turned bloodshot. He had already established an obscure, mental connection with the imprint, so he believed he had gained the recognition of the legacy. The legacy belonged to him. Now that Jian Chen was forcefully comprehending the imprint and absorbing the legacy hidden within it, he saw it as Jian Chen directly taking his possessions brazenly. How could he let this slide? Chapter 2348, The Grand Exalt's Descendant, 3. The Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak, Gong Sun Ji, seemed to become crazy. He used a secret technique to burn his life force, unleashing as much of the power of his god artifact as he could to attack Jian Chen. He tried to stop him from taking the legacy. He already believed that the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint was his. Whatever Jian Chen took from the imprint, it would mean him losing that part of the legacy. At this moment, Jian Chen absorbed the contents of the imprint as quickly as he could. The Grand Exalt's legacy imprint struggled more and more. If this continued, it would break free from him before long. As a result, he no longer had any spare time to deal with the Radiant God Kings. He just stood in the air, submerging his entire mind into the imprint. At that moment, it seemed like he did not put up any defenses against the outer world at all. This time, Gong Sun Ji unleashed all the power he could with his god artifact, swinging it heavily towards Jian Chen with astonishing pulse of energy. Immediately, with a heavy boom, Jian Chen was struck by Gong Sun Ji's sword. This scene stunned Gong Sun Ji, probably because even he did not imagine he would strike Jian Chen so easily. However, he then became overjoyed. He knew extremely well that Jian Chen had not put up any defenses against his attack. He had completely endured it with his body. According to Gong Sun Ji's belief, no matter how powerful, no matter how great Jian Chen's body was, he would definitely have to pay a heavy price after taking on a strike from a god artifact. Even if he did not die, he would be left half alive. Behind Gong Sun Ji, the other Radiant God Kings with god artifacts all became overjoyed when they saw Jian Chen take on Gong Sun Ji's god artifact attack. Immediately, they controlled their god artifacts and sent them towards Jian Chen. They all used their full strength in an attempt to kill off Jian Chen completely. Immediately, booms constantly rang out. Jian Chen did not fight back against their attacks. He did not even dodge. He withstood their attacks with his body. The god artifacts immediately knocked Jian Chen around as they struck his slender body with soaring might. In the end, a huge hammer fell from the sky, striking Jian Chen's head like a bolt of lightning. The powerful pulses of energy caused space to distort. Jian Chen immediately struck the ground. What's this all about? Why has the invincible Chang Yang suddenly become unable to fight back? It must be because of the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Chang Yang probably wanted to comprehend the imprint, but it did not recognize him in the end. It has sucked away his soul, severing his senses of the outside world. Fantastic! We can kill him effortless now. A lot of people are saying that Chang Yang is Qing Shan in disguise. If we really kill him, the martial soul lineage will lose a member. That's a service of great merit. The merit of killing Chang Yang will belong to all of us. Let's all take action and we'll all be rewarded. In the distance, many radiant saint masters called out and poured over. It was as if Chang Yang was already dead in their eyes even though he was invincible moments earlier. However, the radiant god kings with god artifacts were unable to lighten up at all. Instead, their hearts weighed heavily as their faces were very ugly, as they did not see even a single droplet of blood. Someone who possessed a similar level of cultivation to them had taken on over a dozen attacks from god artifacts with his bare body, yet not even blood had been drawn. Who would believe this if they did not witness it with their own eyes? Method of the Exalted Saint. At the same time, Jian Chen's mind shook as he completely submerged himself within the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. He ravished with joy. He had finally found the Grand Exalt's cultivation method in the imprint. The cultivation method was created by the past master of the Tower of Radiance. It was called the Method of the Exalted Saint. Absorb it. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen immediately absorbed everything related to the cultivation method. Immediately, the portion of the imprint that bore the details of the cultivation method poured into Jian Chen's head like a flood. Jian Chen immediately felt his head swell painfully as all the tremendous information was forced into his head. The amount of information was just too great, so great that Jian Chen even found it a little too much with his current level of cultivation. Outside, all the radiant god kings with god artifacts gathered around Jian Chen. Their eyes had widened as they stared straight at Jian Chen, who sat on the ground. Their eyes were filled with undisguised shock. Many wounds covered Jian Chen. They came from the god artifacts in their hands. But without any exception, all of the wounds were just scratches. They were nowhere close to harming his organs. It was not even enough to draw blood. What made them even more surprised was that Jian Chen's wounds actually healed at a visible rate. In just a few seconds, the injuries they had inflicted on Jian Chen with god artifacts completely vanished. Not a single scar was left behind. The sight of this left all of them stunned. The powerful lords of main peaks with their god artifacts were all dumbfounded as if they had just seen a ghost. How is this possible? Gong Sunji said with a trembling voice as if he had been heavily affected by this outcome. He's currently absorbing the legacy imprint, so he can't divert any attention to the outside. Let's keep attacking and see just how long he can last, one of them called out and immediately continued his attacks with his god artifact. The other god artifact wielders took part as well. Afterwards, the group of radiant saint masters who had surged over participated as well. All of them unleashed their most powerful attacks at Jian Chen. Immediately, the laws of the hallowed surged in the surroundings. The powerful energy wreaked havoc on the earth mercilessly. Jian Chen had already become submerged by attacks. But very soon, all of them were left dumbfounded. Just like before, Jian Chen only suffered a few scratches after taking on all their attacks. Moreover, these scratches had only been inflicted by the god artifacts. In other words, no matter how powerful the radiant god kings were, including the ones who had broken through to late god king, none of them had the right to harm Jian Chen at all as long as they did not possess a god artifact. Heavens, is he even human? Everyone gasped. What they just witnessed completely upheaved their understanding of the world. If they were facing a primordial realm expert, they could accept it at the very least. However, their opponent just happened to be a god king just like them. At this moment, Jian Chen completely received all the information regarding the method of the Exalted Saint. He had completely grasped the unprecedented Grand Exalt's cultivation method. However, the legacy imprint was not as simple as a single cultivation method. There were also powerful radiant arts and extremely ancient secret techniques from a whole different aeon. There was even the knowledge on cultivation personally penned by the Grand Exalt, as well as the comprehension and understanding of laws. Jianchen did not waste any time after accepting the method of the exalted saint completely. He tried to absorb the other contents of the imprint. But at this moment, the legacy imprint he had suppressed within his hand suddenly became scorching hot. Its power increased by countless times in that instance, and it immediately broke free from Jianchen's grasp. It flew out and arrived before Gongsun Ji. How could Jianchen allow such a thing to happen? He bellowed out, and his presence erupted. He arrived before Gongsun Ji in a single instance, directly reaching out towards him. However, a power from the Tower of Radiance appeared silently, enveloping Gongsun Ji completely. It protected him. The Tower of Radiance was a peak god artifact, an item on the same level as the Eneta Tower. As a result, Jianchen was insignificant as an ant before the power. He was unable to harm Gongsun Ji. With a flash, the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint vanished between Gongsun Ji's eyes as a streak of light. Gongsun Ji closed his eyes and collapsed as stiff as a board. He fell unconscious. All the Radiant Saint Masters there immediately became stunned by this. Everyone looked away from Jianchen and focused on Gongsun Ji. They were confused. No one knew what had just happened. Artifact spirit. Jianchen looked at Gongsun Ji deeply and secretly called for the artifact spirit. Master, he has the bloodline of the past master of the Tower of Radiance flowing through him. He's a descendant of the past master. The artifact spirit's voice rang out within Jianchen's head. His voice was also filled with shock and disbelief. I've learned from the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance that the past master is not a sovereign of this aeon, nor is he a sovereign of the past aeon. He was from the one before that. I really never thought, the bloodline of the past master would be able to survive for 2 eons. Master, I still don't have full control over the Tower of Radiance, and the lingering consciousness of the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance is affecting me at all times. I can't remove this power that protects the Grand Exalt's descendant, said the artifact spirit. Although he had become a part of the Tower of Radiance, he had spent far too little time in this state. Moreover, he had fused with too much of the lingering consciousness from the artifact spirit of the Tower of Radiance, so he would be influenced by the lingering consciousness most of the time. There was nothing that he could do. Jianchen sank into his thoughts. He was not surprised by this because he had already been expecting this to be the final outcome ever since he discovered the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint reaction to Gongsun Ji's bloodline. The imprint had been removed from the steel through his comprehension of the diagram. Logically speaking, he was supposed to inherit everything within the imprint, but he had never thought that the descendant of the past master of the Tower of Radiance would appear. The legacy imprint was intelligent. Although he fulfilled the conditions, he was still an outsider to the imprint, while the blood of the person who had left behind the imprint in the first place flowed through Gongsun Ji's blood vessels. He was the descendant of the Grand Exalt. The legacy imprint would naturally choose a descendant over an outsider. Although Jianchen might have been able to inherit everything if he had killed Gongsun Ji earlier, he would have never done something like that because such an act would violate his morals. If Gongsun Ji was completely unrelated to the past master of the Tower of Radiance, so be it. However, he was the past master's descendant after all. Chapter 2349. Leaving the miniature world, what I wanted the most was the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. Now that I've already obtained the entirety of the method of the Exalted Saint from within the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint, I've basically reached my goal for visiting the Radiant Saint Hall, thought Jianchen. He calmly looked at Gongsun Ji, who was protected by the power of the Tower of Radiance. He knew there was nothing he could do to Gongsun Ji anymore now that the power of the Tower of Radiance protected him. What has happened? Why has the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint suddenly flown to the Lord of the Scorching Sun Peak? Cries rang out from all around Gongsun Ji. All the hallowed Saint Masters looked at Gongsun Ji with either confusion, mixed feelings, envy, or jealousy. Afterwards, someone attacked Gongsun Ji with confidence. He was one of the 16 people with god artifacts. He swung his god artifact towards Gong Sun Ji without any hesitation. The temptation of a grand exalt's legacy was just too great. Everyone wanted it. Naturally, some people did not want to just watch Gong Sun Ji benefit. Unfortunately, Gong Sun Ji was protected by the power of the Tower of Radiance. Even primordial realm experts would not be able to harm Gong Sun Ji within the Tower of Radiance, let alone them as mere god kings. Boom! The person's god artifact struck the power around Gong Sun Ji with lightning speed. With a great rumble, not only did his god artifact fail to approach Gong Sun Ji, but all of its power even rebounded, causing it to strike the person heavily. Spurt! Blood immediately sprayed out from the radiant god king's mouth. He was knocked far away by the god artifact's power. He was shocked. There's an invisible power protecting Gong Sun Ji. Immediately, someone noticed the reason and cried out. Jianchen no longer had any intentions of sticking around now that he had obtained the cultivation method. He turned his head and looked into the distance, at the dejected Donglin Yanxue who stood several dozen kilometers away. He sighed inside as he experienced mixed feelings. Afterwards, he took a step in the air. He seemed to have fused with space, completely disregarding the distance. He crossed over in a single instance and arrived before Donglin Yanxue. I'm going to leave this miniature world immediately. Leave with me. I'm afraid that some people will target you. Although you're the chosen saint and you possess quite the status, I'm afraid that some of them have lost their minds and will no longer care about your identity as chosen saint, Jianchen said calmly. Donglin Yanxue did not seem to hear Jianchen's words. She looked at him blankly, and after a while of silence, she asked with mixed feelings, Who are you? At this moment, a roar rang out in the distance. A furious voice boomed through the surroundings. Method of the Exalted Saint. The details of the method of the Exalted Saint are actually gone. Chang Yang, return my method of the Exalted Saint. Gong Sun Ji awakened several dozen kilometers away. He had flown into a fury, charging towards Jianchen madly as hatred burned within his eyes. The cultivation method was the most important thing within the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. Without the impressive cultivation method, he would struggle to reach the peak even with the Grand Exalt's notes on comprehension and cultivation as well as the ancient secret techniques. One day, he would find himself unable to take a step forward due to the limitations of his cultivation method. The Master of the Tower of Radiance is my ancestor. My ancestor's bloodline flows within me. I'm the one who's supposed to inherit my ancestor's legacy. You have no right at all to take it. Return my method of the Exalted Saint, Gong Sun Ji bellowed out. He had already learnt about everything from the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint. He had learnt that he possessed a noble bloodline. As a result, he treated the Grand Exalt's legacy imprint as his personal possession. He would not allow anyone to take it. What? The Tower of Radiance's master is Gong Sun Ji's ancestor? All the Radiant Saint Masters in the miniature world were stunned by Gong Sun Ji's calls. Gong Sun Ji, even if you have a Grand Exalt's blood flowing through you, you would have never been fated to obtain the legacy imprint without me. You should be thankful, Jianchen snorted coldly. He had expended a lot for the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. The origin of ways could be ignored. After all, the origin of ways had assisted the artifact spirit in obtaining the Tower of Radiance. Now that the artifact spirit had successfully become part of the Tower of Radiance, the origin of ways could not be considered as wasted. After all, he had received something in return. However, Jianchen was confident that no one in the Radiant Saint Hall aside from himself could comprehend the diagram within the stele. Even the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall would not be able to. The final test in the diagram had nothing to do with talent or affinity for comprehension. It required martial soul force. If the diagram was a treasure chest, martial soul force was the key to it. As a result, martial soul force was required to remove the Grand Exalt's legacy method from the stele. Jianchen waved his hand and light immediately flashed. A huge strand of sword chi dozens of meters in length shot towards Gong Sun Ji with blinding light. Gong Sun Ji was protected by the Tower of Radiance, so Jianchen's attack failed to harm him. However, the force from the sword chi knocked him far away. Artifact Spirit, open the gateway. Jian Qin contacted the Artifact Spirit after the strike. Yes, Master. The Artifact Spirit responded. He had already recovered quite a lot of power while Jian Qin was comprehending the diagram. In the next moment, the space behind Jian Qin twisted violently, and a gate rapidly formed. Opening a gate from within the miniature world was far easier than opening one from the outside. This time, the Artifact Spirit did not take too long to open it up successfully. Let's go. Come with me. It won't be good if you stay, Jian Qin said to Donglin Yanxue before pulling her through the gate while she remained in a daze. They vanished. Many of the Radiant Saint Masters saw the gate open up, and all of them ran over with lightning speed. They wanted to leave the miniature world. These people were all weaker Hallowed Saint Masters. Due to their weaker strength, they would be completely useless even if they continued to stay. They wanted to leave and spread the news that a member of the martial soul lineage had broken into the Tower of Radiance. However, the gate closed extremely quickly. As soon as Jian Qin and Donglin Yanxue had left, it closed up, giving them no chance to leave. God damn it. What's up with the gate? Why did it close up as soon as Changyang left? That's strange. Why do I feel like the gate opened up just for Changyang? Many Radiant Saint Master cursed. They all found this matter strange. Donglin Qiushue stood with the other peak lords with god artifacts. They stared in the direction that Jian Qin had vanished into as they sank into their thoughts. Just who is this Changyang? Donglin Qiushue asked sternly. It doesn't matter who he is, but he definitely isn't Qin Shan. His actions and behaviors don't match up at all, the Lord of the Sky-Gazing Peak said emotionlessly. He really doesn't seem like Qin Shan. If he were Qin Shan, we would not be alive right now. In reality, he already showed mercy when he attacked us before, said another peak lord as he sighed gently. Gong Sunji is actually a descendant of the master of the Tower of Radiance. But fortunately he was here. He stopped the martial soul lineage from taking away the complete legacy. Another peak lord felt fortunate. Although he felt envious and jealous of Gong Sunji, it was better than having the martial soul lineage taking the legacy away. Changyang, I really never thought you'd be a part of the martial soul lineage. Since you're from the martial soul lineage, why don't you kill me? I'm the current chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall. Killing me would be a wonderful slap to the Radiant Saint Hall's face, right? Jian Qin and Donglin Yanxue reappeared in the mountain ranges outside. Several months had passed, so the mountain range had completely quietened down. It returned to its previous remote state. However, Donglin Yanxue took a few steps back after leaving the miniature world. She maintained her distance from Jian Qin, staring at him sharply. There was undisguised pain in the depths of her eyes. You should be able to tell that I actually hold no ill intentions towards your Radiant Saint Hall, or the Radiant God Kings in the miniature world definitely would not be still alive. That's because with my strength, killing them all will be a piece of cake even if they've broken through to late God King. Even if they have so many god artifacts, Jian Qin said seriously. You're not Qin Shan, so who are you? Donglin Yanxue asked. Jian Qin's actions were completely different from Qin Shan's. This allowed her to determine that they were two different people. The Radiant God Kings that claimed he was Qin Shan in disguise in the miniature world were wrong. Jian Qin looked at Donglin Yanxue and sighed gently. Actually, I'm Jian Qin. Donglin Yanxue quivered when she heard that. She stared at Jian Qin in surprise as disbelief filled her face. She had never seen Jian Qin, but she was simply far too familiar with that name. She was so familiar with it that she even knew quite a lot of Jian Qin's past. It was not just Donglin Yanxue. Basically everyone across the entire desolate plain knew Jian Qin's name. In recent years, experts had gathered on the desolate plain. Foreign peak experts roamed the desolate plain recklessly, basically creating a huge ruckus. They stifled the peak organizations on the desolate plain. In the very end, the blood medallion even appeared as the only form of identity verification on the desolate plain. All of this happened because of a single person. And this person was obviously Jian Qin. As a result, Donglin Yanxue immediately thought of everything she knew about him when she heard his name. In the past, he had risen up in the Neptunian divine palace, standing up against so many supreme god kings. He protected a weak little girl with all that he could so that she could inherit the Neptunian divine palace. In the end, he even caused an event that basically shook up the entire Saints world. He was directly responsible for the deaths of around half of all the supreme god kings on the god king's throne. Afterwards, he faced the pursuit of the famed heavenly king of azure brilliance and solitary sword ancestor. After exposing the Aneta Tower on planet Tianming, he became the target of all the peak experts in the Saints world. In the end, he fled to the desolate plain and seemed to vanish completely. Even when the peak experts overturned every stone in the desolate plain and used everything that they had, they still failed to find him. As a matter of fact, without any exaggeration, Jianchen was a figure of legends in Donglin Yenshue's heart. After all, he was only a god king, yet he evaded the pursuit and search of peak experts time and time again. This was basically an impossible feat in the eyes of many people. However, Jianchen had accomplished the impossible. As a result, many people across the Saints world felt admiration towards Jianchen. Donglin Yanshue happened to be one of them. "Hey, are you really Jianchen?" Donglin Yanshue stared at Jianchen blankly. She had never thought that the Jianchen that the peak experts were looking for so many years, including even the vice leaders of the Radiant Saint Hall, had actually been hiding in the Radiant Saint Hall the entire time. Such a legendary person had actually been beside her the entire time. Afterwards, the two of them had even spent a year together in the world of Moon and Star. It made Donglin Yanshue's head spin. Qing Shan suddenly appeared back then in the world of Moon and Star. "Was it because of you?" Donglin Yanshue asked soon afterwards. Jianchen shook his head and replied, "It actually had nothing to do with me. Although I also possess martial soul force, I didn't know Qing Shan at all before I entered the world of Moon and Star. I had no connection to the martial soul lineage either." Donglin Yanshue's heart eased up slightly. After learning that Jianchen had nothing to do with Qing Shan, she felt slightly better. "In other words, I managed to escape from Qing Shan because of you? The attack from the vicious beast was a complete lie? After you fainted, I fought Qing Shan. You fought Qing Shan for my sake?" Donglin Yanshue had completely accepted the shock from the reveal of Jianchen's true identity. Now, she stared at Jianchen with shining eyes. "I'm leaving the Tower of Radiance, so I'll be bidding farewell to you here." Jianchen did not answer Donglin Yanshue. He wanted to leave after throwing that down. "Hold on. There are definitely elders watching over the Tower of Radiance outside. If you leave alone, it'll look very suspicious. You'll struggle to make it out of the Radiant Saint Hall." Donglin Yanshue stopped Jianchen in time and said, "You better let me take you out. If I'm by your side, it'll save you a lot of trouble. You can't have your identity exposed right now. You already know my true identity, yet you still want to help me. If the upper echelon of the Radiant Saint Hall learn about this, you'll be in deep trouble." Jianchen looked at Donglin Yanshue deeply. "It's not a problem at all. I'll just forsake the position of chosen saint, that's all. We shouldn't tarry. Let's go." Donglin Yanshue completely accepted everything that she would be facing. With that, she flew towards the exit of the Tower of Radiance first. Jianchen sighed inside as he looked at Donglin Yanshue before following her closely. The journey back was smooth. Several days later, Jianchen and Donglin Yanshue arrived at the exit. "Master, I still need some time to fully grasp the Tower of Radiance, so I probably won't be able to leave with you," the artifact spirit's voice rang out at this moment. "Artifact spirit, there's no need to follow me. Just stay here and take your time to grasp the power of the Tower of Radiance. Moreover, there's a formation personally cast down by the Grand Exalt of ancient paths outside. It locks the Tower of Radiance firmly to the Sacred Hall, which prevents anyone from taking the Tower of Radiance away. As long as the Grand Exalt's formation remains intact, you probably won't be able to break free even if you gain complete control over the Tower of Radiance," Jianchen communicated with the artifact spirit. "The Lord of the Soaring Clouds Peak, Han Exen, was once my teacher. Bai Yu is my junior sister. Speaking of which, They were the people closest to me in the years I spent in the Radiant Saint Hall. If they enter the Tower of Radiance in the future, look after them for me." "Yes, Master." Chang Yang. The exit of the Tower of Radiance was empty. Donglin Yanxue stood there as the light in her eyes flickered. She stared at Jian Chen's ordinary face with mixed feelings and said, "You're about to leave and who knows whether we'll meet again in the future. This might be the last time I see you, so can I see your true appearance?" "As you wish." With a thought, the mask on Jian Chen's face slowly vanished, revealing his true appearance. Immediately, the familiar face that Donglin Yanxue had seen who knows how many times was presented before her. It was a determined, handsome face. The facial features were sharp and refined, and it bore a sense of coldness that could only be developed through bloody hardships. The pair of eyes shone brightly and were piercing like swords. When one stared into them, they seemed to hide invisible sword intent. As she looked at Jian Chen's true appearance, Donglin Yanxue only felt Chang Yang's only imperfection had been fixed perfectly. She stared at Jian Chen's face in a daze as if she was trying to embed his true appearance into the depths of her heart. At the same time, over a dozen powerful presences flooded into the Radiant Saint Hall. Over a dozen peak experts stood with their hands behind their backs outside the Radiant Saint Hall. They all took a single stride and appeared in the territory of the Radiant Saint Hall with a flash. "Everyone, what are you trying to do?" The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall immediately appeared and stared at them with a sunken face. "Please do not become angered, leader. We've come to wait for Chang Yang," a person chuckled from among the experts. He acted rather friendly. "The untested people from the other peak organizations have all undergone the test now. Their identities have been confirmed. Only Chang Yang remains. Please do not take offense, leader. Just treat us as guests who are visiting you," the outsiders said amiably. They laughed and joked. However, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall knew that they only behaved like this because they feared the Celestial Sword Saint. They were afraid of going overboard, which would draw out the Celestial Sword Saint. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's face was originally sunken, but when he heard that Chang Yang was the only person who had not undergone the blood test, his eyes immediately shone. "Are you saying that a disciple of my Radiant Saint Hall is actually Chang Yang?" The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall asked coldly before shaking his head. "That's impossible. Jian Chen is a fighter. He can't be a Radiant Saint Master." "That's difficult to say. What if Jian Chen is the 8th member of the martial soul lineage? There's no need to jump to conclusions, leader. Since Chang Yang is the only untested person right now, it's extremely likely for him to be Jian Chen. Of course, we haven't tested him personally, so we're not completely certain," the outsiders said leisurely. They glanced at the sacred hall that stood above the clouds, perhaps unintentionally, and burning greed filled the depths of their eyes. They happened to look towards the top floor of the sacred hall, where the Tower of Radiance stood. The Tower of Radiance was a peak god artifact used by a Grand Exalt in the past. It was on the same level as the Anata Tower. Such a powerful god artifact would obviously tempt all the experts in the Saints' world. However, the Grand Exalt of Ancient Paths formation had locked the Tower of Radiance in place, severing all hopes of obtaining the god artifact. There was nothing they could do about the Tower of Radiance. At this moment, another group of a similar size arrived. However, they seemed to maintain a much lower profile than the outsiders. They all concealed their presence, making them seem just like ordinary people. They flew over at a steady pace. They were also peak experts, the type who could make the entire desolate plain tremor from a few gestures. They stood on the same level as the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. They were the native experts of the desolate plain. An old man in dragon robes stood out very much among the group of native experts. Even though he kept his presence concealed, he would still give off an astonishing bearing, causing the surroundings to tremble. He seemed to be the strongest out of the entire group. The old man was the ancestral emperor of an everlasting empire on the desolate plain, the Dao Huang Empire. Let's wait for the junior called Chang Yang to come out of the Tower of Radiance and get him tested. Once his identity has been confirmed, Please leave here immediately, the ancestral emperor said. His old, dignified voice was filled with a firmness that could not be defied. The native organizations of the desolate plain had already become irritated by these outsiders since a long time ago. The outsiders felt no fear towards the ancestral emperor of the Dao Huang Empire. They remained composed and one of them said, "Of course. Once we test Chang Yang and verify that he's not Jianchen, all of us will leave the desolate plain." "I hope you can keep your word," the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall said coldly. He glanced past the group of people with the ancestral emperor and clasped his fist. "Since everyone has already come, why don't you enter the sacred hall? I'll send people to summon Chang Yang." Afterwards, this group of people who would remain significant wherever they went entered the sacred hall with the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. At the same time, one of the 8 vice leaders, Xian Zhan, stood on the top floor of the Radiant Saint Hall as he stared at the entrance to the Tower of Radiance with brimming interest. "Xian Zhan, all of the outsiders have already gathered in our Radiant Saint Hall. Chang Yang is the last person to be tested. It's extremely likely for him to be Jianchen in disguise. Enter the Tower of Radiance immediately and get him tested." At this moment, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's voice rang out in Xian Zhan's head. A gleam of light flashed through Xian Zhan's eyes, and they immediately deepened. At the same time, a huge estate sat quietly in a corner of an extremely bustling city in the central region of the desolate plain. There was a small building in the depths of the estate. A middle-aged man stood outside. He bowed as he reported some information politely. "Senior 2, aside from a disciple of the Radiant Saint Hall called Chang Yang, everyone on the desolate plain has been tested now. It's extremely likely that this Radiant Saint Master is Jianchen in disguise. Both the outsiders and native experts have gathered at the Radiant Saint Hall. Senior 2, do you think we should go as well?" "Chang Yang? Radiant Saint Master? Is Jianchen a part of the martial soul lineage?" An old voice rang out from the building. "We are unable to verify this right now," the middle-aged man replied politely. "I understand. You are dismissed." "Yes, Senior 2. The middle-aged man backed away politely. A black-robed old man sat within the pavilion. He looked in the direction of the Radiant Saint Hall and murmured, "Jianchen sure is hard to find. However, he is extraordinary. He can actually evade the heavenly secrets, preventing all of us from forecasting even a trace of him. Even Master is unable to do anything about it. I just wonder whether this person called Chang Yang is Jianchen in disguise. I hope he is, or who knows when we'll be able to find Jianchen. Master has become rather impatient. We can just toss the Aneta Tower out there for them to fight over it. I only need to take Jianchen back to complete the mission." At the same time, in a verdant estate brimming with life in another bustling city, a benevolent-looking old man explained the mysteries of the ways to a beautiful woman in a green dress who only seemed to be in her 20s. "Adriana, you've recently reached the primordial realm, so your usage and understanding of the way of life has reached a completely new level. However, Infinite Prime is only the start of the primordial realm. You still have a very long path ahead of you, so you are still lacking in many aspects in your comprehension of the way of life." At this moment, a middle-aged man made his way over quickly and stopped in the distance. He said politely, "Hall Elder, there's news about Jianchen." The eyes of the woman in green who was listening to the old woman's explanations immediately lit up. She looked at the middle-aged man and said before the old woman could reply, "There's finally news. Where is he?" Everyone is focused on a Radiant Saint Master called Chang Yang in the Radiant Saint Hall right now because he's the only untested person left. Many people suspect him to be Jianchen, said the middle-aged man. A disciple of the Radiant Saint Hall? Does Jianchen possess martial soul force? Otherwise, it will be impossible for him to disguise himself as a Radiant Saint Master. The old woman frowned when she heard this news. Adriana smacked her forehead in annoyance. She grumbled, "Sigh, how did I forget about that? Jianchen is not just a fighter. Elder, Chang Yang is probably Jianchen because Jianchen is also a Radiant Saint Master. Let's go to the Radiant Saint Hall immediately," Adriana said to the old woman beside her. She had remained in a lower world for several million years as the elven god tree. She was one of the people who had known Jianchen for the longest, so she naturally knew Jianchen was a talented Radiant Saint Master and a fighter. She even knew that he was the only Class 9 Radiant Saint Master on the Tianyuan continent. There's no need to hurry. There's no need to hurry at all. Since Jianchen can remain hidden for so long, he's definitely skilled at it. Let's see Jianchen's upcoming performance first. After all, his escape from the hands of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance was a first. Perhaps the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance's strength isn't the greatest, but he really does have almost unmatched speed across the entire Saints world. Escaping from him is extremely difficult even for Grand Primes, let alone God Kings, said the old woman mysteriously as she squinted. After Xianzhan received the message outside the Tower of Radiance, the light in his eyes flickered rapidly. His gaze would be piercing at times and calm at other times. He was clearly deeply conflicted. However, he gradually calmed down. He dismissed all the elders nearby before slowly turning around. He faced the entrance with his back. He stared at the hazy white sea of clouds outside the Tower of Radiance as his gaze deepened. At this moment, the screen of light near the entrance of the Tower of Radiance pulsed. Jianchen and Donglin Yanxue suddenly appeared. As soon as they emerged, they discovered Vice Leader Xianzhan standing right before them. Immediately, they became taken aback. Donglin Yanxue greets the Vice Leader. Donglin Yanxue immediately bowed and glanced at Jianchen beside her. Her heart could not help but tighten. Chang Yang greets the Vice Leader. Jianchen also clasped his hands and bowed. He glanced at the Vice Leader's back as he suddenly felt an ill omen. He could clearly sense that something was off with the Vice Leader. You've come out. At this moment, Xianzhan turned around. He was calm as if nothing had happened at all. However, his dignified, fierce eyes were abnormally deep. Many matters have happened recently. Many peak experts on the desolate plain have gathered within the sacred hall. Donglin Yanxue, although your status is no lower than an elder's, you need to be careful in the next few days. Don't run into these people, all right? Xianzhan continued as he looked at Donglin Yanxue with shining eyes. Donglin Yanshue's expression immediately changed slightly, and she responded in a hurry. Jianchen's heart sank. He glanced at Xianzhan deeply. Although Xianzhan was talking to Donglin Yanxue, he felt like the Vice Leader was purposefully directing these words towards him. Have I been discovered already? Jianchen thought. Now that all the experts had gathered in the Radiant Saint Hall, Jianchen's suspicions were basically confirmed. The Tower of Radiance resides in a forbidden ground, so don't stay here. Leave immediately, just in case you violate any rules. Xianzhan waved his hand and said indifferently. Afterwards, Donglin Yanxue left in a hurry with Jianchen. Xianzhan, Changyang is extremely likely to be Jianchen. Are you just going to let him go like this? You need to know that if he's Jianchen, he's also the 8th member of the martial soul lineage. If he matures in the future, he'll become a huge threat to our Radiant Saint Hall. The voice of the Radiant Saint Hall's leader rang out in Xianzhan's head again after Jianchen and Donglin Yanshue's departure. With the voice, an illusionary body conjured from a sliver of the leader's soul silently appeared. He looked at Xianzhan in confusion. He must leave here. Xianzhan showed no politeness towards the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall as he stared in the direction that Jianchen had left in. Xianzhan, I really don't understand why you want to protect him. After all, he might belong to the martial soul lineage. What happened in the world of Moon and Star might be directly related to him. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall looked at Xianzhan helplessly. Because he brought me this. With a wave of his hand, a jade bottle and a jade slip was tossed to the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. The leader was curious. He directly opened the jade bottle and saw a droplet of bright red blood within it. When he saw the blood, the leader's eyes immediately flashed with light. He said sternly, "This is Xian Ming's blood." Very soon, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall understood everything. He said gently, I'm basically certain that Changyang is Jianchen now. If I've guessed correctly, Xian Ming must be in the Aneta Tower. Xianzhan nodded and continued sternly, "That's only one of the reasons. The second reason is that if he doesn't leave and is directly exposed in the Radiant Saint Hall, the outsiders will definitely try to capture him regardless of the cost. They'll start fighting in the Radiant Saint Hall. They're all Grand Primes and possess devastating power. Once they start fighting in our Radiant Saint Hall, the result will be unthinkable. Changyang, what should we do now?" At the same time, Donglin Yanxue and Jianchen moved through the sacred hall in a hurry. Right now, she had become rather flustered. After all, many peak experts had gathered in the Radiant Saint Hall. All of them had come for Jianchen, so Donglin Yanxue immediately became clueless about what to do since she had never faced a situation remotely like this before. "I'll leave the Radiant Saint Hall first. As long as I make it out of the protective formations, everything will become much easier," Jianchen replied secretly. The sacred hall was very large. He and Donglin Yanxue basically chose an extremely obscure path, avoiding as many people as possible as they directly made their way out of the sacred hall. Fortunately, the sacred hall itself was a god artifact. It could block the senses of the soul, so Jianchen and Donglin Yanxue did not need to worry about the outsiders discovering them. Very soon, Jianchen and Donglin Yanxue made it out of the sacred hall unobstructed. Without any hesitation, they directly flew towards the protective formation around the Radiant Saint Hall. Many Radiant Saint Masters hurried through the mist and clouds with Radiant Saint Force. Jianchen and Donglin Yanxue were enveloped by light as well, so it was very difficult to recognize them. Just like that, they managed to disguise themselves among all the Radiant Saint Masters. Soon, they made it to the protective formation safely. "Stop! Who are you, and why don't you have the presence of the blood medallion?" However, as soon as they emerged from the protective formation, a husky voice rang out. A bald old man suddenly appeared before Jianchen. He gave off a powerful presence. He happened to be an infinite prime, and he looked at Jianchen judgmentally. "I'm Donglin Yanxue, and who are you, sir? The matters of our Radiant Saint Hall aren't something that you outsiders should stick your noses into." Donglin Yanxue dispersed the light around her and called out with a frown. They were right outside the protective formations of the Radiant Saint Hall, so she feared no one. "Donglin Yanxue? So you're the current chosen saint of the Radiant Saint Hall." If it weren't for that identity, I would have made you suffer after what you just said so that you can learn what the outcome is for disrespecting your seniors." The bald old man sneered at Donglin Yanxue before looking at Jianchen. He demanded sternly, "Hand over your blood medallion, or I can only arrest you." Donglin Yanxue immediately started to panic when she saw how forceful and persistent the bald old man was. She worried for Jianchen. However, Jianchen remained calm. He said, "Please do not become flustered, Senior. The item you're looking for is in my space ring. Since Senior wants to check it, I'll take it out. Compared to the chosen saint, you're indeed slightly more pleasant. Hurry up and take out the blood medallion." The bald old man eased up slightly when he heard Jianchen's words. They were outside the protective formation of the Radiant Saint Hall, so they were still in the Radiant Saint Hall's territory. He really did not want to attack disciples of the Radiant Saint Hall unless he had no choice. After all, the Radiant Saint Hall needed to be respected as a peak organization. Moreover, the chosen saint was present as well. It was quite fortunate for him that Jianchen would cooperate. Jianchen looked at Donglin Yanxue and said, "Your Highness, it's best if you return first." A gleam of light shone through Donglin Yanxue's eyes when she heard that. She seemed to understand what Jianchen was trying to do. She glanced at him deeply and said, "Take care." The bald old man had no doubts. He continued to stand there leisurely, waiting for Jianchen to take out the blood medallion. "Senior, please look carefully. What you want to check is right here." Jianchen suddenly smiled strangely after Donglin Yanxue left. With that, a sword appeared in his hand. The bald old man immediately became slightly startled when he saw Jianchen draw a sword and not the blood medallion. But afterwards, his eyes narrowed, and he became surprised. This was because he discovered the sword was actually a god artifact. Such a puny radiant Saint Master actually has a god artifact. The bald old man was astonished, and at the same time, he felt that something was off from the bottom of his heart. As expected, as soon as the god artifact appeared, it shone with blinding light. 7 illusionary stars were conjured from the sword. It directly cleaved towards the bald old man under the illumination of starlight. The strike was astonishing. The 7 stars formed a single line, enveloping the bald old man like a galaxy. The 9-star sword of heavenly ways. It's the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. Your Genshin. The bald old man's face changed drastically. Although he was an infinite prime, he was only an early infinite prime. He felt a great threat from Jianchen's attack that was no weaker than a regular infinite prime strike. Jianchen had struck out too suddenly, so the old man was caught completely off guard. The attack was extremely fast as well, so the old man had no time to dodge. The 9-star sword of heavenly ways arrived before the old man in a single instance. At this critical moment, tremendous energy surged out from the old man, immediately forming a barrier around him. At the same time, he became clad in armor. Boom! Time was too tight, so the old man could only put up something like this as a defense. Right after that, Jianchen's 9-star sword of heavenly ways arrived. The strike directly cut through the barrier of energy around the old man. The 9-star sword of heavenly ways gave off the pressure of a god artifact and landed on the old man's armor as it shone brightly. Powerful energy exploded. The old man's armor was only a supreme quality saint artifact, so it was on a completely different level compared to the 9-star sword of heavenly ways. It was immediately shredded to pieces, and the old man was sent flying far away as well. A vicious gash appeared on his body, making blood rain down. I found Jianchin. Jianchin is here. Ancestor, Jianchin is here. As he flew backwards, the old man immediately tried to communicate with his ancestor who was within the Radiant Saint Hall. However, his message was cut off by the sacred hall that stood above the clouds. It was unable to penetrate the structure. God damn it! The old man cursed angrily. He immediately took out a jade talisman to send his message through a secret technique. However, Jianchin immediately took out a formation disc from his space ring and tossed it onto the ground after sending the old man flying. He stood on the formation disc and immediately activated it. The formation disc contained a teleportation formation. However, many disciples of the Radiant Saint Hall moved about in the surroundings. The moment they saw the 9-star sword of heavenly ways, they immediately recognized Jianchin, and they all cried out. Even more of them directly used various methods of communication to contact their seniors. Intense white light had already surrounded Jianchin as the powers of teleportation surged out. This was a long-distance teleportation formation. Although it could not cross regions, it could still send him extremely far away. It was the best method for him to escape from the Radiant Saint Hall. Otherwise, he would not be able to make it far away before the peak experts caught up to him given his current strength. This was the case even though he had grasped the laws of space. Jianchin, we've looked for you for so long and we've finally found you. You've made us search so hard. At this moment, a heavy voice rang out from the Radiant Saint Hall. With the voice, the energy in the surroundings churned wildly, condensing into a huge hand that reached towards Jianchin with lightning speed. The hand condensed from energy contained the mysteries of laws and the truths of the world. As it reached over, all the laws in the area seemed to be affected as well. Jianchin could clearly sense the space around him rapidly freeze up as he stood on the teleportation formation disc. The owner of the hand wanted to forcefully interfere with the teleportation of the disc. However, it was all too late. By the time space had completely frozen and the terrifying hand had arrived, Jianchin had vanished from the formation disc. A black-robed, middle-aged man stood in the air outside the sacred hall of the Radiant Saint Hall. He frowned as he stared in the direction that Jianchin had vanished into. He murmured, "I was one step too slow. I actually let him escape. I failed to catch him this time. If I want to take him next time, I'll have to contend against the others. What a pity. Jianchin has appeared. He really is hiding in the Radiant Saint Hall." However, since he has shown himself, he'll never escape again. I would like to see where he'll hide this time. At the same time, all the peak experts gathered in the Radiant Saint Hall appeared beside the black-robed, middle-aged man. Delight filled their eyes as they expanded the senses of their souls rapidly. These people were all peak experts who stood at the apex of a plane. The senses of their souls were so powerful that they could envelope the entire desolate plain in a single instance. Before Jian Chen had exposed himself, the peak experts were indeed unable to see any flaws in his disguise from Mo Tianyun's mask. As a result, they were unable to realize his true identity. However, now that he had exposed himself, the peak experts had locked onto him. Even with Mo Tianyun's mask, he could no longer stay hidden. I found him. He's in a city. Chapter 2354. Hunzong. However, in a single instance, the peak experts all found Jian Chen. Does he plan on leaving the desolate plain through a teleportation formation? The teleportation formations across the plain have been sealed up a long time ago. He's dreaming if he wants to flee through them. As they spoke, all the peak experts vanished from the Radiant Saint Hall. They pursued Jian Chen. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall hovered before the sacred hall as the light in his eyes flickered. He hesitated. Clearly, he was rather tempted by the Ena Tower on Jian Chen, along with the thought of obtaining it and handing it up to the First Majesty of the Heavenly Palace of Bisheng. It was his only opportunity to develop ties with the Heavenly Palace of Bisheng. However, as soon as he thought of Xianzhan, he could not help but hesitate. Just don't get involved. There are a lot of people who want the Eneta Tower. Even if you go, it's unlikely for you to obtain the Eneta Tower. At this moment, Xianzhan appeared. He stared at the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall deeply and said, "Moreover, things have happened with the Tower of Radiance. The mist inside is rapidly decreasing. The Tower of Radiance is enough for us. It is extremely likely for your son to be inside the Eneta Tower. Aren't you afraid that they'll harm your son after they obtain the Eneta Tower?" asked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. The Eneta Tower is a peak god artifact after all. Even if it's heavily damaged, it's still impervious. Unless they refine the Eneta Tower, they can't enter it. Xianzhan was not worried at all. He said with composure, "And as for refining the Eneta Tower, I don't think they're bold enough." "Oh no. Leader, something terrible has happened." At this moment, a panic-stricken voice rang out. An elder of the Radiant Saint Hall hurried over with several Radiant God Kings behind him. However, the Radiant God Kings seemed to be in a rather horrible shape. "Leader, I've just received news that the Grand Exalt's legacy within the Tower of Radiance appeared. The supreme cultivation method within the legacy imprint was obtained by Chang Yang, and he's a member of the martial soul lineage," said the elder in a hurry. "What? The Grand Exalt's legacy appeared? The cultivation method actually fell into Jian Chen's hands?" The expression of leader of the Radiant Saint Hall changed drastically. Even Xianzhan's eyes narrowed as he became extremely shocked. The Tower of Radiance had a Grand Exalt's legacy. This had always been an ancient rumor that had yet to be proven in the Radiant Saint Hall. They had never thought it would suddenly appear now. The Grand Exalt's cultivation method is the greatest legacy of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't let it fall into the hands of others. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall became extremely stern. In the next moment, a terrifying presence radiated from him, and a white spear suddenly appeared. It concealed its glow, but it still possessed devastating power. The spear swept past the space there and directly ripped it open. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall directly stepped into the ripped space and left. This time, Xianzhan did not stop him. Nothing would have changed if Jian Chen had not obtained the Grand Exalt's legacy, but Xianzhan could no longer find any reasons to help him now that he had taken away the supreme cultivation method. 100 million kilometers away from the Radiant Saint Hall in the central region of the desolate plain, a small building of only 3 stories tall sat within the noisy region of a bustling city. The building was one of the many buildings on the street. It was located close to the center of the city. The land prices there were astronomical. However, ever since the building was purchased by a mysterious person many years ago, It had just sat there idly. No one moved in. The building was empty. There were no decorations at all. There was only a formation disc several meters wide placed on the top floor, covered with profound inscriptions. At this moment, the formation suddenly flashed, and with a powerful pulse in space, a person in white light appeared. This person was Jianchen. As soon as Jianchen appeared, he leapt out the window and shot towards the center of the city like a bolt of lightning. He was extremely stern. After his soul had fused with chaotic force, his senses became unimaginably powerful. He could vaguely sense that the senses of several dozen souls had locked onto him. The owners of every single one of these senses was not someone he could stand up to. There was even an extremely obscure senses of the soul that Jianchen could barely discover. It sent chills down his spine. He really is Jianchen. He truly hid deep. Now, I can finally return to Master with what Master wants. At the same time, an old voice rang out from an estate within a distant city. Afterwards, the wooden door of a building within the depths of the estate opened up, and an old man in coarse clothes walked out. Senior too. Immediately, a middle-aged man appeared silently. He immediately showed respect when he saw the old man. Let's go. Let's get Jianchen and return to the heaven-splitting clan, the old man said indifferently as if he did not take the peak experts on the desolate plain seriously at all. With that, he vanished completely. The middle-aged man vanished as well, leaving the place as if he had teleported. Adriana, it's time for us to go as well, a benevolent old woman said to the woman in green beside her while she held a staff. At this moment, Jianchen had already arrived at the very center of the city. This was the hub of the city, and the teleportation formations that could take people across planes happened to be located there as well. Jianchen, the teleportation formation have already been sealed up. You can't leave. Hand over the Aneta Tower, and I won't make things difficult for you. Jianchen, give the Aneta Tower to me. Our Dao Huang Empire will protect you. Give me the Aneta Tower, and I'll let you live. Otherwise, die. At this moment, the space above Jianchen twisted. Peak experts appeared one after another. They were scattered throughout the surroundings, remaining vigilant of one another as they surrounded Jianchen. The sky above the city ripped open and endless light fell, illuminating the region. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall had arrived as well. He looked at Jianchen with mixed feelings and sighed gently. I don't care whether you're Changyang or Jianchen. But regardless, leave behind the cultivation method. That's the greatest legacy of our Radiant Saint Hall. We can't let others take it away, and we can't let people of the martial soul lineage take it away even more. The greatest legacy of the Radiant Saint Hall? Did that thing in the Tower of Radiance end up with Jianchen instead of a disciple of your Radiant Saint Hall? At this moment, a mocking voice rang out. A middle-aged man with an appearance that was nothing special had silently arrived. He seemed just like an ordinary person. However, the appearance of the middle-aged man immediately caused the expression of the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall to change. He growled, Hunzong, you've actually come as well. The middle-aged man referred to as Hunzong chuckled and said, the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage has appeared. How can I not come for something so significant? Do you think you can change something with your arrival? This isn't your martial soul mountain. You can't act as you wish, the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall growled. Even if I can't change anything, I can keep your Radiant Saint Hall busy at the very least, so I can stop you from harming the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage, Hunzong chuckled. Then he glanced past all the peak experts present while remaining at ease and fearless. He clasped his fist and said, everyone, Jianchen is the eighth brother of our martial soul lineage. I hope you can do it for the sake of our martial soul lineage and not harm Jianchen. We only want the Aneta Tower. Get him to hand it over, and we won't make things difficult for him at all. Hunzong, your martial soul lineage can take your person, but you can't take away the Aneta Tower. That's right. We can let Jianchen go unscathed for the sake of your martial soul lineage. We can let you take him away. However, you must leave behind the Aneta Tower. The peak experts gathered there all called out. They were determined. Even though Hun Zhang's cultivation was nothing special in their eyes, none of them dared to underestimate him. Instead, a number of the peak experts even revealed some fear. Surrounded, Jian Qin remained composed. He watched this scene coldly, and the light in his eyes flickered. From how these people treated Hun Zhang, he could already tell that even though the martial soul lineage could not give birth to grand primes, they were not as weak as he had imagined them to be. In particular, he discovered with his enhanced senses that although Hun Zhang's cultivation was the lowest out of the experts present, his threat level seemed to be even greater than the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Jian Qin, are you willing to give up the Enata Tower and return with me to the Martial Soul Mountain? That's the true home of our martial soul lineage, said Hun Zhang. He looked at Jian Qin cautiously, seeking his opinion. Leave behind what you obtained from the Tower of Radiance, or don't even think about leaving the desolate plain, said the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall firmly. He left no room for negotiation. The Grand Exalt's cultivation method was the greatest legacy within the Radiant Saint Hall. He could not afford to lose it. He would take it back regardless of the cost. Yuqin, you're getting bolder and bolder. If I want to take Jian Qin away, do you think you can stop me? Let alone stop me, who knows who'll emerge as the victor if we really start fighting. Hun Zhan mocked the leader of the Radiant Saint Hall. Try it. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall's eyes turned cold as a powerful presence radiated from him. He did not back down at all. Senior Hun Zhang, you should go back. I obtained the Enata Tower in a lower world, and then I brought it up to the Saint's world. I will never just hand it over. Even if it'll be returned to the heavenly palace of Bixing, I'll return it personally, Jian Qin replied at this moment. He spoke very indifferently and calmly. The eyes of all the peak experts gathered there turned cold from that. Even Hun Zhang was surprised. He stared at Jian Qin deeply and only said after quite a pause, "Are you certain that you don't want to relinquish the Enata Tower?" "I will not," Jian Qin was determined. "Very well. I respect your choice." Hun Zhang nodded. As he said that, his eyes suddenly became pitch black. They were like two black holes that could devour all light. Extremely powerful martial soul force shot out from his eyes, piercing through space towards all the peak experts gathered there as invisible swords. Martial soul force was a wondrous and unique power formed from the combination of a fighter and radiant saint master. It was extremely powerful and specifically targeted the soul. It was invisible, making it extremely difficult to sense. It would catch people off guard. The peak experts gathered there were vigilant of their surroundings at all times, remaining cautious of everyone there. However, no matter how cautious or vigilant they were, it was a waste of effort before the martial soul force. They were unable to defend against martial soul force. Even if they discovered it, they could only dodge beforehand. If they could not dodge it, they could only endure it. Martial soul force was invisible and could pierce all objects. Let alone the protective energy around them, but even god artifacts of lower qualities were unable to stop Hun Zhang's powerful martial soul force. Immediately, all the peak experts nearby were affected. Under the influence of martial soul force, they became temporarily stunned. They were all very powerful. Their souls were like balls of roaring flames. With Hun Zhang's martial soul force scattered, it was very difficult for him to harm any one of them. However, stunning them for a split second was more than enough. Since you don't want to give up on the Enata Tower, we'll take the Enata Tower back to the Martial Soul Mountain with us. Jian Qin, you're very right. You obtained the Enata Tower in the lower world. Since it fell into your possession, it's your fortune. Why must you give it to someone else? Hun Zhang laughed aloud. He had already arrived beside Jian Qin, wanting to leave with him while everyone was stunned. When Hun Zhang took action, a tremendous, imposing mountain that was seemingly capable of flattening the world appeared silently. It hovered in outer space strangely. The mountain was not physical. Instead, it was an illusionary shadow. It seemed like a projection. 6 figures sat on the illusionary mountain. They were all expressionless and emotionless, like monks meditating. They gave off presences of varying strength. Qing Shan happened to be among them. The illusionary mountain happened to be the martial soul mountain renowned throughout the saints' world. However, it was only a projection of the martial soul mountain. Jianchen, for you, the entire martial soul lineage has come. Come with me to the martial soul mountain. As long as we arrive on the martial soul mountain, these people won't be able to do anything to you, Hunzong chuckled. He was fearless, as if he was not worried about offending so many peak experts at all. However, just when Hunzong wanted to take Jianchen away, space suddenly ripped open, and a skinny hand reached out. With the truths of the world, it pressed towards Hunzong along a trajectory that obeyed the laws. Hunzong immediately became extremely stern. At that critical moment, his entire presence suddenly changed, as if it had established some sort of connection with the illusionary mountain in outer space. He also extended his hand, making it collide loudly with the skinny hand that reached out from the spatial crack. The collision was not as intense as one would have imagined. It all seemed calm. The two of them had purposefully withdrew their powers, or the storm of energy from their clash this time would have been enough to demolish the entire city. Hunzong suddenly quivered and retreated uncontrollably. At this moment, the illusionary mountain beyond the desolate plain quivered gently as well. The projection seemed to become even dimmer. Our heaven-splitting clan will be taking Jianchen. No one else is allowed to take him away. As an old voice rang out, the spatial crack suddenly expanded, and an old man walked out. Chapter 2356. People from the God clan. The peak experts affected by Hunzang's martial soul force had all recovered now. They did not bother about settling their debts with Hunzong. Instead, all of them stared at the old man who had suddenly appeared with ugly expressions. Even if they ignored the old man's strength, the heaven-splitting clan he represented was enough to stifle everyone present. This was all because of their heaven-splitting ancestor. The heaven-splitting ancestor was one of the most powerful experts below Grand Exalt. The first majesty of the heavenly palace of Bisheng stood at the same level. They were both figures revered by people in the saints' world. These peak experts had taken such drastic measures to search for the Enata Tower because they wanted to hand it over to the heavenly palace of Bisheng. If they did that, they could establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bisheng through the merit of their service. But at this moment, someone from the heaven-splitting clan had suddenly appeared. They wanted to take Jianchen away, which was a horrible matter for all the peak experts gathered here. They could never afford to offend the heaven-splitting clan. Even Hunzang's heart sank when he heard the heaven-splitting clan. The leader of the Radiant Saint Hall also felt that this was a horrible matter. Jianchen possessed the Grand Exalt's cultivation method. He could not allow the cultivation method to end up in the hands of the martial soul lineage, but he felt powerless now that the heaven-splitting clan had thrown their hat into the ring. "Does your heaven-splitting clan want the Enata Tower as well?" asked a peak expert regretfully with a frown. They had gone to extremely great lengths to find Jianchen. They had searched through the entire desolate plain time and time again. Now that they finally found him, someone from the heaven-splitting clan suddenly appeared, wanting to take Jianchen away. Would that not mean all their efforts during those years would be for nothing, and they were taken advantage of in the end? This made all of them resentful. The old man snorted coldly. He said in complete disdain, "It's only a damaged god artifact. Why would it catch the eye of our heaven-splitting clan? I've only come under Master's orders to take Jianchen away. You can fight over that tower as much as you like." Everyone became relieved from that. At the same time, they felt shocked. All of them looked at Jianchen with mixed feelings. Naturally, they knew who the master the old man was referring to. Aside from the legendary heaven-splitting ancestor, who else had the right to make such a powerful expert refer to them as master? Jianchen was only a god king, yet he could raise the attention of the heaven-splitting ancestor and even make him personally give orders to send an expert over to protect him. It did not matter what intentions the heaven-splitting ancestor had for protecting Jianchen. What was certain was that once this news made it out, all the people who wanted to lay their hands on Jianchen would need to carefully consider the consequences. "Jianchen, give the Enata Tower to them, and then come back to the heaven-splitting clan with me. If you can get the support of my master, There will be no need for you to go to such great lengths to establish ties with the heavenly palace of Bishing, the old man from the heaven-splitting clan said to Jianqin. Jianqin remained expressionless. He asked sternly, Junior is very confused. Junior has nothing to do with the heaven-splitting clan, and Junior doesn't know the heaven-splitting ancestor either. May I ask just why the heaven-splitting ancestor wants me? You will naturally find out once you arrive at the heaven-splitting clan, replied the old man from the heaven-splitting clan. Unless the heaven-splitting ancestor comes personally, don't you even think about taking Jianqin away. At this moment, Han Zong called out. Suddenly, he began to shine with blinding light, and he seemed to become one with the martial soul mountain in outer space. Their powers completely fused together. It was not just that. The 6 figures seated on the martial soul mountain also shone like Han Zong. Their vital energies and all their powers seemed to combine together in that instance before fusing with Han Zong through the illusionary martial soul mountain. As a result, not only did Han Zong fuse with the power from the martial soul mountain, but even the 6 other members of the martial soul lineage had completely fused their powers with Han Zong through a special method. Immediately, Han Zhang's presence became extremely terrifying. All the peak experts gathered nearby frowned. They became afraid. The legendary martial soul array of the martial soul lineage really is worthy of its name. However, this isn't the martial soul mountain, so the amount of power you can borrow from the martial soul mountain is extremely limited. A mere projection of the martial soul mountain is not enough for you to do whatever you want, said the old man from the heaven-splitting clan coldly. He immediately used a palm strike. His hand seemed to fuse with the surroundings and the laws, crushing down on Han Zong with the supreme mysteries of the world. But at this moment, a staff appeared out of nowhere. It gently struck the old man's hand. Immediately, a devastating might erupted. It directly ripped through space and created a fist-sized black hole. It devoured everything in the surroundings, sucking away all the energy there. The old man from the heaven-splitting clan remained the same as before after the strike, but the staff that had appeared out of nowhere dimmed. An old woman appeared silently, and the staff returned to her hands. I was already expecting the God clan to send people over, but I never thought it would actually be you. It looks like that young leader of your God clan really does place great importance on Jianqin, actually sending a hall elder. The old man from the heaven-splitting clan looked at the old woman calmly. What? A hall elder of the God clan? The expressions of all the experts gathered there changed after learning the old woman's identity and background. In the past, the God clan was known as the greatest clan in the Saints' world. They were the undisputed most powerful organization. However, ever since the war god passed away, they had declined and lost that title. However, even with that being the case, the God clan was still among the handful of peak organizations in the Saints' world. Their heritage was extremely deep. Very few people dared to provoke them. Tu-san, since you know Jianqin is someone that our war god holds dearly, you should also understand that you won't be able to take Jianqin away, said the hall elder, Tyne. She knew what kind of person the heaven-splitting ancestor was and knew even better that he definitely had some sort of unknown motive for taking Jianqin away. As a result, she could not allow Jianqin to be taken away by the people of the heaven-splitting clan. Tu-san shook his head, and a sliver of disdain flashed through his eyes. He said, the current God clan is no longer the God clan of the past. Before your little war god truly matures, you have no right to speak to our heaven-splitting clan like that. Moreover, unless a great elder of your God clan comes personally, you hall elders aren't my opponent. Tyne's eyes turned cold when she heard that. She said slowly, I never thought that a clan so insignificant that they were unworthy of our God clan's attention would try to dominate our God clan today. Tu-san, since you're so confident, I would like to see whether you can defeat me, an early Grand Prime, with your strength as a mid-Grand Prime. With that, Tyne pointed her staff at Tu-san. Immediately, a dense, green light enveloped him. In the next moment, the two of them vanished. Han Zong, take Jianqin back to the martial soul mountain as soon as possible. Don't let the people of the heaven-splitting clan get a hold of him. The heaven-splitting ancestor isn't someone who would be up to any good. When Tyne vanished, her voice rang out in Hun Zhang's head. Chapter 2357. A dangerous situation. Hun Zhang's heart immediately sank when he received the Hall Elder's message. He became even more determined to stop the Heaven-Splitting clan from taking Jianchen away. Hun Zhang has already used the Martial Soul Array. He possesses the powers of the Martial Soul Mountain and 6 other people. Coupled with the strangeness of Martial Soul Force, it'll be difficult for us to take him on alone. Quick, let's work together to keep Hun Zhang busy. We can't let Jianchen approach the Martial Soul Mountain before he hands over the Enata Tower. Since Jianchen is unwilling to hand over the Enata Tower, let's take it ourselves. Everyone, if you want the Enata Tower, we need to cooperate. Let's get the Enata Tower first. We can talk about how we split it some other day. At the same time, the peak experts gathered there spoke out. They understood just how deep the heritage of the Martial Soul lineage ran. Even though they could never become Grand Primes, no peak organization on the Saints' world dared to underestimate the Martial Soul lineage. This was all because of the Martial Soul Mountain's existence. They knew extremely well that once Jianchen returned to the Martial Soul Mountain, there would truly be nothing that they could do. This is the territory of my Daohuang Empire, so leave the Enata Tower to me. You only need to keep Hun Zhang busy. We can discuss who the Enata Tower belongs to after we get it. The ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire spoke out at this moment. He gave off the bearing of a ruler and was serious both in speech and manner. He seemed like he could not be defied. He directly took action. His hand shattered space, arriving before Jianchen in a single instance as if distance was an arbitrary concept. Jianchen, I don't want to harm you. I will only take your Enata Tower. Do not make an ignorant decision, the ancestral emperor said. The Martial Soul lineage and the God clan stood behind Jianchen, so he was clearly slightly worried about Jianchen's identity. However, this worry was evidently not enough to stop him from trying to take the Enata Tower. Don't you dare! Hun Zhang called out. Using the fusion of powers, he struck out decisively, stopping the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire. At the same time, his eyes immediately turned pitch black, like a black hole that swallowed all light. Powerful martial soul force shot out like invisible swords once again, targeting the peak experts in the surroundings. Be careful, one of the peak experts called out, but it was still useless. Even though they could sense Hun Zhang's attack, there was nothing they could do to defend against it. The invisible swords of martial soul force possessed a wondrous power that could shake up the soul. It pierced through their defenses and struck their souls. Immediately, all of them tremored, and their eyes became momentarily lost. At the same time they paused. Even the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire was not an exception. However, Hun Zhang did not target these people any longer. Taking Jianchen with him was the priority. He grabbed Jianchen's shoulder and was about to leave. Boom! At this moment, a deafening boom exploded in the sky. A colossal, azure peng appeared beyond the desolate plain. Its wings were unfurled, blotting out the sun. It struck the projection of the Martial Soul Mountain heavily. The projection immediately shook violently. It constantly twisted and distorted in shape as it rapidly dimmed. It was the Azure Peng King. He had taken action as well to stop the people of the Martial Soul lineage from taking Jianchen away. Due to the Celestial Sword Saint's existence, he did not dare to set foot on the desolate plain. However, the projection of the Martial Soul Mountain was unable to descend onto the desolate plain either. It could only appear in outer space. As a result, the Martial Soul Mountain became the perfect target for the Azure Peng King. With the Martial Soul Mountain under attack, Hun Zhang seemed to be heavily affected. His body trembled as his face became flushed. The power from the Martial Soul Mountain had almost been severed from him. The Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance was a peak expert who had reached mid-Grand Prime. Moreover, the noble, powerful blood of a divine beast flowed through his veins. Not only was his speed almost unmatched, but even his battle prowess could be described as impressive. A strike from him possessed extraordinary power. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, our martial soul lineage has never done anything to you. What are you trying to do? Zong called out. Jianchen must die. Even if the God clan is protecting him, I will never leave him alive. The Azure Pern King's icy voice rang out loudly from outer space, brimming with killing intent. He was the only person who truly wanted to kill Jianchen among the peak experts. Han Zhang's face became ugly. The Azure Pern King's original form was a great pung. He had a vicious personality and was known for clinging to his grudges in the saints' world. He was not an easy person to deal with. Since he had said something like that, he really did want to kill Jianchen. However, he did indeed possess the strength and right to be fearless of the God clan. The war god of the God clan had yet to mature completely. With his terrifying speed, no one in the God clan could make him stay. That even included the 3 great elders. Han Zong, you won't be able to take away Jianchen as long as the Aneta Tower remains with him. The peak experts affected by Han Zhang's martial soul force had all recovered. They all struck out to keep Han Zong busy. Booms constantly rang out in outer space. The Azure Pren King launched consecutive attacks, where every single one of them was devastating, causing space to crack. The projection of the martial soul mountain tottered under his attacks. It already showed signs of collapse. The martial soul array had been forcefully cut off as well, unable to support Han Zong any longer. After all, this was only a projection of the martial soul mountain. It only contained a portion of the martial soul mountain's power. It was not the true martial soul mountain. Without the support of the martial soul array, Han Zong immediately lost the upper hand as he faced so many peak experts who were more powerful than him. The protective formation of the Dao Huang Empire had already been activated. All of its power gathered outside the city, locking in the shockwaves and preventing them from spreading out. At the same time, the tremendous population of the city was all moved away by the power of the formation. The situation is bad. Chu Jian, let's go help out Han Zong. Aside from Han Zong, there's only me and you out of the 6 of us who can stand up to those people. The 6 figures on the mountain projection did their best to stabilize the martial soul mountain. One of the middle-aged men looked at the desolate plain and said sternly, "We can't. We have to stabilize the mountain projection. We can't let it collapse from the attacks of the Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance, or we won't be able to cross this huge distance and return to the martial soul mountain through the martial soul mountain's power," said Chu Jian sternly. On the desolate plain, the ancestral emperor took action again. He reached out towards Jianchen, locking down an entire region. Jianchen's eyes turned cold. With a thought, the damaged Aneta Tower shot out from between his eyes. The power of laws that compressed the limits seemed to have condensed on the Aneta Tower. It was able to crush everything. Hence, as soon as the Aneta Tower appeared, the frozen space was instantly freed. Jianchen clutched the Aneta Tower and activated as much of its power as he could, sending it towards the ancestral emperor. The Aneta Tower. The ancestral emperor's eyes lit up. He stared at the Aneta Tower with shining eyes, and his hand that originally reached towards Jianchen moved towards the Aneta Tower instead. Terrifying power condensed on his hand. It seemed to be able to collapse space. He had put on the strongest defense. However, the power of the Aneta Tower was just terrifying. Even though Jianchen could not unleash any of its power as a peak god artifact, its weight alone was shocking. Having been careless, the ancestral emperor was directly knocked hundreds of meters away by the force of the Aneta Tower. It really is a god artifact of the very peak. The ancestral emperor's eyes shone with interest. He had only been knocked away, not injured, because even though Jianchen had refined 5 floors of the Aneta Tower, he was still unable to harm a Grand Prime through the Aneta Tower alone. Immediately, the ancestral emperor took action again. This time he was prepared. He did not collide with the Aneta Tower directly. Instead, he used a gentle force to wrap around the Aneta Tower. Chapter 2358. Attempting the Path of Swords. Jianchen was cold. He knew that he had caught his opponent off guard the first time, so he had managed to knock him away while he was still ignorant of the Aneta Tower's force. However, he definitely could not use the same method twice. It was extremely likely for the Aneta Tower to be taken away. Jianchen pulled back the Aneta tower, clutching it in his hand as he rapidly retreated. The hand condensed from terrifying energy reached over with a supreme pressure. Wherever it passed by, space froze up and the laws paused. It moved towards Jianchen with great speed such that he was unable to condense his laws of the sword. All the laws he grasped were affected, and he was unable to use them like normal. The ancestral emperor's attack could affect space and interfere with the operation of the laws. This was how terrifying a Grand Prime was. Even though they were nowhere close to Grand Exalts, who had basically become a part of the laws, they had still comprehended the laws to an extremely deep level as Grand Primes. They could use a part of their powers. As a result, when the ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire struck out, Jianchen felt like he was facing the world, as if what targeted him was the world he currently resided in. Even all of his laws had been restrained. However, Jianchen did not become flustered at all. With a thought, he used the power of the Aneta Tower. Immediately, it destroyed Jianchen's restraints and enveloped him. Jianchen isolated himself from the world with the power of the Aneta Tower, allowing him to become immune to the restraints. With a flash, he retreated to several hundred meters away, arriving in the central square of the bustling city. Currently, the central square had been reduced to a mess. All the structures had collapsed into ruins. The entire place had basically been flattened by the shockwaves from the battle. The protective formation of the Daohuang Empire did not protect this city. Instead, it gathered a certain range away from the city, locking the place up to prevent the shockwaves from spreading out and causing even greater damage. Too many peak experts had gathered here. As a result, even the protective formation for the entire empire was unable to block all of it. If something happened to the formation, they would lose something even more important than what they were trying to protect. However, two places remained unaffected in the ruined square. The first place was the teleportation formation across plains. This was one of the most valuable properties of the Daohuang Empire, and it had been rather difficult to construct. As a result, it received the most protection. The other place was a flight of stairs constructed from sword chi. This was the path of swords constructed by the greatest expert of the desolate plain, the celestial sword saint. It was also unscathed. All the shockwaves seemed to be cut in half by an invisible sword when they approached the path of swords, redirected into two streams. Jianchen had already arrived beside the path of swords. He glanced at the peak experts gathered in the surroundings before looking at the colossal bird that blotted out the sky. Determination appeared in his eyes, and he set foot on the path of swords boldly. Immediately, Jianchen became wrapped up by powerful sword chi. He was already standing on the first step of the path of swords. The face of the ancestral emperor changed. He immediately stopped, staring at Jianchen from 100 meters away. He was expressionless. The path of swords had been laid down by the celestial sword saint to find a successor. It was rumored that if someone made it to the end of the path of swords, they would have the opportunity to become the celestial sword saint's disciple. Once someone set foot on the path of swords, the test laid down by the celestial sword saint would formally begin. The ancestral emperor of the Daohuang Empire did not dare to continue his attacks. Jianchen has actually made it onto the path of swords? Oh no! Jianchen focuses on cultivating the way of the sword, and his talent is rather extraordinary. If he passes the celestial sword saint's test and becomes his disciple, we won't have any opportunities left. The peak experts who were keeping Han Zong busy paid attention to Jianchen's situation at all times. Now they all cried out with ugly expressions. Some of them even blamed the ancestral emperor. Don't worry. He can't pass the celestial sword saint's test. Do you know how strict the celestial sword saint is with his selection? How can he pass the test personally set down by the celestial sword saint so easily? Said a peak expert. At this moment, there was a flash, and the Hall Elder of the God clan, Tyne, as well as the old man from the Heaven-splitting clan, Tu San, returned. They were both in a rather messy shape. No one knew the result of their battle. He is actually attempting the path of swords. Tyne stared at the hazy figure surrounded by sword chi on the path of swords and frowned. Then she muttered, though, that might be the best choice right now. However, Tu San's face was sunken. He glared at Tyne and said coldly, "Your god clan has gotten in the way of an important matter of my master. You've made my master wait even longer. Your god clan better consider the consequences of offending my master." Tyne's eyes turned cold and she replied icily, "If your heaven-splitting clan has the ability, come find our god clan on the god Nigma plane. Master is only a step away from that level of cultivation. Once my master breaks through, I would like to see how your god clan plans on continue acting arrogantly." Tu San snorted coldly, as if he disdained Tyne's words. At this moment, the battle between Hun Zong and the peak experts stopped as well as Jianchen set foot on the path of sword. He glanced at Jianchen before looking at outer space. His gaze was extremely shocking. Heavenly King of Azure Brilliance. Suddenly, Hun Zong bellowed out furiously, and he suddenly vanished. When he appeared again, he was on the Martial Soul Mountain. Martial Soul Array. Hun Zong bellowed out and fell into formation with the 6 other people on the Martial Soul Mountain again. Their powers were poured together once more, completely merging with the power from the Martial Soul Mountain. Powerful Martial Soul Force swept out like a shocking wave towards the Azure Pern King. The Martial Soul Force came from the 7 of them. It was no longer scattered. Instead, it was concentrated on a single point. It was extremely terrifying. The Azure Pern King, who had been constantly attacking the Martial Soul Mountain, showed some fear. With a flash, he retreated to billions of kilometers away, avoiding the range of the Martial Soul Mountain's attack. Hun Zong and the 6 others stood with sunken faces on the Martial Soul Mountain. The Azure Pern King was just too fast. Their attacks with Martial Soul Force could not land, so there was nothing that they could do about him. Jianchen must die. None of you can protect him. If your Martial Soul lineage dares to help Jianchen again, I'll kill you all as well. Unless you stay on the Martial Soul Mountain for your entire lives like cowards, you won't be able to avoid being hunted down, the Azure Pern King said coldly with sharp killing intent. Afterwards, the Azure Pern King looked at the desolate plain, at Jianchen who had already stepped onto the path of swords. A cold intent appeared in his eyes, and in the next moment he plucked one of his azure feathers and threw it. Like a bolt of lightning, the feather shot towards the desolate plain with great speed. It crossed a huge distance in a single instance, arriving above the path of swords and shooting towards Jianchen with devastating power. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.